At 5 p.m. on Friday. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Congratulations to the GB News winners at this year's Trick Awards.
And the winner of Interview of the Year is... Alistair Stewart reveals his heartbreaking diagnosis to Camilla Tormini.
And the winner is GB News Breakfast. And the winner is Nigel Farage.
And thank you to you, our GB News viewers and listeners, for making us the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Your lunchtime update on the stories that matter across the UK.
From breaking news and insightful analysis, inspiring stories and lively debates. You're comparing yourself to a former Prime Minister.
Which is it?
Stay informed, stay updated, stay entertained.
I just don't know how anyone would not want to be there.
Every weekday from midday.
We are Good Afternoon Britain, only on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Jubes Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the arguments. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together and what have we got, in my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel. On election night, we are throwing a party.
The GB News Election Night Watch Party will be live from Essex and you are all invited.
On air from 10 o'clock, we'll have familiar faces from across the channel, entertainment and lots more stuff as we keep our eye on all the results as they come flying in.
If you want to join our live Election Night Watch Party audience, scan the QR code on screen or go to gbnews.com/election party.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 12 o'clock on Thursday, the 27th of June. I'm Tom Harwood.
And I'm Emily Carver.
Today marks exactly 1 week until Election Day, and we'll be live across the country as the race for second place heats up.
Yes, Nigel Farage will be speaking live in County Durham as he takes the Reform campaign trail up to the northeast. One poll yesterday predicted his insurgent party picking up an astonishing 18 seats, but can he live up to the hype?
And not to be outdone, a Tiggerish Rishi Sunak will be speaking too, fresh from the last night's BBC debate, where those who voted Conservative in 2019 decided the Prime Minister smashed it out of the park, with 82% of that constituency thinking he came out on top.
And away from the politics, we'll be catching up with the royal family as Prince Harry opens up about the difficulties coping with bereavement.
Just 6 more days of campaigning. A week today, people will be voting. Perhaps most people will have voted. An election campaign that felt like it was dragging on and on and on suddenly feels like the ending is really rather close indeed.
And I think you can tell, actually, I don't know about you, but last night it did seem as though Rishi Sunak definitely was just trying to give it another go. A refresh, definitely more fighting talk, don't you think?
I think he seemed
perhaps a
like
little too late. A little bit more oomph, taking the fight to Keir Starmer a little bit more, and that's probably why he came out on top with that polling. But yes, 6 days of election campaigning. Can anything change at this point?
It's a very interesting question because we're forgetting, I suppose, in all of this conversation, that many people, many thousands of people, have already voted.
Yes.
Postal ballots have been landing on doormats for the past few weeks. And it could be that in some areas, I think the numbers are up to 40% of voters.
40%?
Vote by post. Up to 40%.
I don't approve of that. Get down to the polling station if you can.
So, goodness me, all to play for in what we're describing as the race for second place. It looks like Labour has won, but frankly, will Ed Davey be the next leader of the opposition? Or could it be a simple majority rather than a supermajority? These are the questions that are now at the fore, but we'll be just dissecting it all throughout the programme.
Yes, get your thoughts in. Are you still undecided? That's an interesting question. Lots of people seem to be. gbnews.com/your say. But the headlines with Tatiana.
Emily, thank you very much and good afternoon. The top stories. Let's start with some breaking news, and the number of Metropolitan Police officers under investigation over bets on the timing of the general election has risen to at least 7. The force says one, a protection officer assigned to the Prime Minister, was arrested last week on suspicion of misconduct in public office. He's been bailed and is subject to restricted duties. A further 6 officers have been identified as having placed bets on the timing of the election. The Met says the Gambling Commission continues to investigate those cases, but the Met's Directorate of Professional Standards is being kept informed. At least 5 Conservatives are being investigated by the Gambling Commission as well, as part of its inquiry into bets. Labour has also been dragged into this row, suspending one candidate after he was investigated by the regulator for betting on himself to lose his seat. Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer returned to the campaign trail today after they clashed over illegal immigration and the betting row in a TV debate last night, with just a week before voters go to the polls. The Labour leader accused the Prime Minister of being bullied into taking action in the betting scandal, while Mr Sunak repeatedly warned voters not to surrender to Labour's tax and migration plans. Sir Keir has today told GB News that the issue is much more than just a border issue.
Record numbers of people are coming here in small boats. He's lost control of our borders, literally lost control, not only of the numbers that are coming, but also who's coming. And so this is not just a border issue, it's a national security issue. The deterrent is smashing the gangs that are running this vile trade so that nobody gets into a boat to cross the channel. The Prime Minister is simply interested in a gimmick, the Rwanda scheme, for people who've already arrived here, a few hundred people.
A man is understood to be a member of the Labour Party who was arrested in connection with the so-called Westminster honey trap scandal has been released on bail. The Met Police says the arrest relates to an investigation being carried out by its parliamentary liaison and investigation team following reports of unsolicited messages sent to MPs and others. Junior doctors in England are walking off the job today for an 11th time in almost 1 year. Medics are warning that more strike action could take place in the summer if the next government doesn't move forward negotiations in a timely manner. Medics are walking out for 5 days this time in their long-running dispute over pay. Junior doctors want a 35% pay rise. The British Medical Association has said it's ready to talk, and the union has already had some discussions with the Labour Party. The BMA insists their junior members are historically underpaid.
Our pay at the moment for a doctor in their first year is £15.50. We're asking for that to be £21. £21 an hour for a doctor that's starting life-saving treatment on our loved ones. £21 an hour for a doctor with student loans of £100,000. And because the pay cut has been so strong, we're losing doctors. We don't have enough. And when we don't have enough doctors, we're seeing patients die needlessly in the NHS every single week.
Labour's pledging to turbocharge careers advice and work experience in schools to combat skills shortages in the workplace. As part of the party's plans to partner with businesses across the country, Labour's committed to delivering 2 weeks' worth of quality work experience for every young person and recruit more than 1,000 new careers advisors. The party says it would build partnerships between schools, colleges and local employers to equip young people with work-ready skills. Labour analysis estimates 1 million children are at risk of receiving inadequate information about the jobs. Shadow Education Secretary Bridget Phillipson says the plans would facilitate a revolution in work readiness, but she also says working people will not be taxed more as a result.
We want to grow our economy. We want to make sure we are a strong country for wealth creation, and nothing in our manifesto requires any additional taxes beyond those that we've set out, for example, ending the tax breaks that private schools enjoy. And it's why growing our economy is so central to the mission that Labour and Rachel Reeves have set out, because we know we've got to get out of this doom cycle of low growth and high taxation. We've got to get our economy moving once more and use that as an opportunity to create jobs right across our country.
And the mother of a British teenager who went missing in Tenerife says some of the money raised by a crowdfunding appeal will be withdrawn to help with the search for her son. The appeal has so far raised more than £36,000. Debbie Duncan has thanked the public for their support, kind messages and good wishes. Jay's now been missing for 11 days. Yesterday, Spanish police searched a mountainous area by helicopter, with sniffer dogs also being used on the ground. He'd gone on holiday for the first time without his parents. For the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now it's back to Tom and Emily.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 8 minutes past 12. Now, last night, Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer took to the debate stage for the final time before the general election, with only a week left before voters go to the polls.
Yes, the head-to-head duel between the two main party leaders saw fiery clashes on issues including illegal migration, tax and net zero too. Now, the pair were also asked if they were really the best candidates the UK had to offer to be Prime Minister.
Mr Sunak, I think you made a fair job of being Chancellor, but you're a pretty mediocre Prime Minister. Sir Keir, I think that your strings are being pulled by very senior members of the Labour Party. Are you two really the best we've got to be the next Prime Minister of our great country?
Goodness me, strong words there. Let's cross straight to our GB News political correspondent, Catherine Forster, who's following the Labour campaign in the West Midlands. And Catherine, you've been following Labour today. How do they think their man did?
Well, you know, they're pretty happy because all they have to do at this point is avoid some sort of catastrophe, because all the polls are saying that when the British public go to the polls this time next week, as we will be doing, they are going to put Sir Keir Starmer as Prime Minister. Now, we don't know the size of the majority, but even talking to, very senior advisors close to the Prime Minister last night, there is an acceptance that Conservatives are not going to win this election. The only question really is how many Conservative MPs are going to be left. Now, the person I was talking to was absolutely thrilled to bits with the Prime Minister's performance, and certainly it was very punchy. He really came out fighting, and he did have Sir Keir Starmer on the ropes, I thought, on a couple of issues. Trans rights, this is something that J.K. Rowling was tweeting last night. She's still very unimpressed with Labour. She may well not vote for them, having voted all her life for Labour. But the other thing, of course, is the small boats crisis. And Rishi Sunak asked again and again, what are you going to do with these people, from Afghanistan or Iran or whatever, that you can't return? Are you going to do a deal with the Taliban? And that brought a load of laughter from the audience. Now, Sir Keir Starmer is saying, I'm going to crack down on the gangs, but I asked him, we're here in the West Midlands, he's at a college talking to young people about opportunities for them, tuition fees, work experience, etc., etc. But I asked him for GB News what the deterrent is in Labour's plan, because I said they don't seem to have one. The Prime Minister is saying that Labour are going to surrender our borders. And he was quite cross, actually. I think probably more with the Prime Minister than me personally, but he really gave a very spirited reply. I think we saw a little bit in the news bulletins, but he basically said, I'm going to take no lectures from the Prime Minister that's overseen, this huge rise in people coming across. He says cracking down on the gangs is a deterrent, because if you stop them coming, they won't be able to make it here. Well, sure, if that happens, the government, of course, are already working on that. This is a problem that faces the whole of Europe. And I did ask him too about offshore processing, as I think about 15 countries in the European Union are thinking of using third countries for processing. He did say that's something he will be open to. So look, it's not very long, and probably a week tomorrow, that Sir Keir Starmer may well be Prime Minister. So let's see if he is going to be more successful in stopping the boats than the current Prime Minister. I wouldn't hold your breath, Tom and Emily.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed. Catherine Forster, our political correspondent there in the West Midlands.
We're going to go straight to Derbyshire now, where the Prime Minister is speaking.
Leadership which has the courage of its convictions. That's what I have. I get that you may not agree with me on everything, but at least you know where I stand. That's what leadership is about. You have to ask yourself, why is he not telling you his plan for the country, what he wants to do? Because he probably doesn't think that you're going to like it when you hear it. Right, we know, as you saw last night, those of you that were watching the debate, absolutely no answers about how to tackle immigration. Right? I've got a plan. We're bringing immigration down. We've got a plan to stop the boats. He would make us the soft touch of Europe when it comes to that issue. On net zero, I've put changes in place that mean, of course, we're going to get there, but we're going to get there in a sensible way. Right? That means that all of you are not going to have to pay thousands of pounds to change your car, your home, your boiler. Because I think your finances and our country's energy security is important. And in fact, on the topic of security, we're living in an incredibly dangerous time. Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, working together in a way that is very threatening to us. That's why I'm investing more in our defence and security. Again, he's not said that he would match that pledge, which is deeply worrying. And perhaps most worrying for all of you is the fact that he is going to whack up your taxes. And you saw that again last night. He simply won't rule out raising your taxes. That's what Labour always do. It's in their DNA. And I don't want you to have to pay more taxes. And that's why, when you think about your choice of this election, do not hand Labour that blank cheque, because you will not be able to get it back. So when you go to that ballot box in a week's time, vote for lower taxes. That's what I want to deliver for all of you. I want to give you more financial security, and we've started that. This year, everyone in work, all of you, receiving tax cuts worth hundreds of pounds in your pay slips this year. And if I'm re-elected, we will go further. We will continue to cut national insurance, because I believe in a country where people like you who are working hard are rewarded for that, and you get to keep more of your hard-earned money. That's why we're going to keep cutting your taxes. And for those of you that want to buy your first home, or have children or grandchildren that want to buy their first home, I want to make that easier. So we're going to abolish stamp duty for first-time buyers, saving them thousands of pounds. And for pensioners, we're going to introduce a triple lock plus, raising the allowance for pensioners, because I believe that if you've worked hard all your life, if you've saved, you should have security and dignity in retirement. Now, Labour haven't matched that pledge, which means that for the first time in our country's history, pensioners face paying a retirement tax, and they are going to come and raid people's pensions, as they always do. So be in no doubt, a vote for the Conservatives is a vote for lower taxes. And I'll just close by saying this, right? I love this country for everything that it has done for me and my family. My grandparents came here. Here I am as your Prime Minister 2 generations later. That's why I will work my socks off for all of you. I'm in this to make a difference to all of your lives. You saw me do that during the pandemic when I was Chancellor, when we were struck with something we hadn't seen before, and I did what was necessary to get our country through. That's who I am as a person. Right? And I'm the one that's prepared to take the bold action, that's got a clear plan to deliver a secure future for all of you, to cut your taxes and give you financial security, that shares your values of opportunity, of aspiration, of security for our nation. And I will always stand up for you. So if I have the privilege of getting your support again, I tell you this, I will not let you down. Thanks very much for having me. Right, we're going to open up if anyone had any questions. Right, who's going first? Hi, how are you?
Hi, I'm fine, thank you. Having a nice day?
Excellent day. I was, I did the dipping of the pottery, which I thought was going to go horribly wrong. And it was all right, wasn't it? Yep. I know it was very good, but it wasn't a disaster.
She has to say that, you know that.
Sorry?
She has to say that.
It didn't overflow into the pot, right? So yeah. Well, I had 2 young girls actually, and they used to love when they were a bit younger going to the pottery cafe. So we have a lot of pottery at home over the years. I was saying I'm going to take that pot home with me and say that Daddy's also done some today. But anyway, right.
So, Prime Minister, what I'd like to know is why you feel that we should vote for another 4 years of Tory government when in the last 14 years you haven't managed to make a good impression on our country. Things are infinitely worse than they were in 2010. I remember it very well. My first daughter was born then. In 2010, 60,000 people used food banks, and last year that was recorded at almost 3 million. That's not acceptable.
Yeah, thank you. What was your name? Sorry, Miss Grant. Look, I don't want anyone to have to use a food bank. Right? Of course I don't. Right? But I'm also very grateful to all those people who volunteer at them, who support them, so that they are there for those who need. Right? And they do a brilliant job, and I'm very grateful to them.
Oh, well, the feed seems to have dropped out a little bit there. We will try and restore it, although I don't think it's our fault on this end.
It looks like the Prime Minister's doing a little dance there, but it perhaps a sixth pledge from the Prime Minister. After grow the economy, cut inflation, cut waiting lists, stop the boats, and whatever the fifth one is, maybe the sixth should be deliver decent broadband to the East Midlands.
And pottery for all. And
sounds like a Corbyn policy. Well, I should say that with us in the studio is Benedict Spence, the political commentator, and we were just listening to the Prime Minister there, perhaps in a bit more of a jovial mood than we've seen him recently.
Well, yeah, the end's in sight. He only has to sort of put up with this torment for a couple more days, and then he can jet off somewhere else. I mean, I think, you know, the pressure is... I was about to say the pressure is off. The pressure hasn't really been on in a very long time, largely because of how his party's run their own campaign. But ultimately, what are you going to do? Are you going to be sort of Gordon Brown-esque and be sort of quite guttural and moody about everything? No, I suppose if there's any opportunity, if you've got any chance, you at least need to appear optimistic. I think the debate didn't go too badly for him last night, although at this point it is, you know, without meaning to sound sort of too resigned to fate, he can have as many good debates as he wants. It's a fait accompli at this point. So, yes, I suppose he's got no other option other than to go out and enjoy the campaign trail, be a bit more of the original dishy-rishy rather than the please vote for me, I'm desperate to stay in number 10.
Dishy-rishy or pottery-rishy?
I mean... That was... I really should have thought of that gag, shouldn't I?
So do you think that this very much is now a race for second place?
It's so dispiriting to think of it in those terms, to think they might not even get in second place if there are any more gaffes. And, you know, there's over a week left, so it's entirely possible. Yes, I think that this is about trying to boost the numbers where they can. You know, we've seen this sort of strategy, haven't we, which is Labour are going to get a supermajority. Don't give that to them because then it'll, you know, effectively undermine democracy. Please give us 100. You know, give us 3 figures. That would be great.
Race for second place, a man in contention for that, at least for vote share, is Nigel Farage, who's speaking in County Durham now.
Wow, what a reception. Amazing. We decided on Sunday that it was appropriate for me to come up here, and quite right too. And we booked a venue, and I thought, well, I don't know. I mean, it's a working day. It might be difficult to get people out in the middle of the day. And I thought, well, I'll come, and there'll be maybe 150 people, maybe 200 people. And yet, with just 48 hours' notice, we've got 1,000 enthusiastic people here in this room. And I tell you what, if we had a couple of weeks to plan it, I can't imagine how big a crowd we could get in this part of the country. We will be doing a national event that'll take place this Sunday at midday at the NEC in Birmingham, and I fully expect it to be the biggest active political meeting that this country would have seen in modern times. I really do. And the reason is all too clear. We all have a deep sense of unease. Something is going very, very wrong with the country that we're part of, with the country that we believe in, with the country we want our kids and grandkids to grow up in. We have spent time indoctrinating a younger generation that everything about our past is wrong. We've been poisoning the minds of our young people. That, I think, is absolutely appalling. I want them to learn that whilst not everything in our history is perfect, actually, there is no country in the world with a better past than us, and we should be proud of those that went before us. There is a growing deep sense of unease about crime on our streets. The fact, it doesn't matter where you are, you can be in the poorest part of the country or the richest part of West London. The number of young people out there now threatening people, stealing mobile phones and carrying knives makes us all, wherever we live, think twice, doesn't it, about going out in the evening. And I'm aiming this particularly to young people. And by the way, one thing they can't understand is the extent to which I am connecting with the younger generation. It's very, very exciting. Whether that's a result of having snakes crawling all over me in the jungle or not, I don't know. But I do have the most active TikTok of any British political figure by miles, and I sense the younger coming. But it's interesting. You think, well, fear of crime is when you get older. No. It's the younger people that now fear crime more than the middle-aged and the elderly, because they want to go to music concerts. They want to go out clubbing, something for which the North East is world-renowned, incidentally. And they're deeply fearful that other young people are carrying knives. So there's a sense of unease about that. And the answer, of course, to that is a completely different, less woke approach to policing, and we should be executing stop and search, stop and search, stop and search. And perhaps there's an even deeper sense of unease about what is happening in our communities. We have always been, particularly compared to our continental neighbours, the most open country when it comes to our relationship with the rest of the world. Think of this part of England. Think of the ships that were built, the men and women that went all over the world, and in turn, people from other parts of the world that came here. And we're the only country in the history of humankind who has developed a relationship with its empire into one of a club that is called the Commonwealth. These things are remarkable achievements. And we've always been, I think as a people, far more generous and far more open-hearted to those around the world facing genuine oppression or the threat perhaps even of death. So we've always been kind to those communities in trouble around the world. We've accepted, absolutely, since the late 1940s, that immigration into Britain can be a good thing. Certainly the choice of food in most of our towns is rather better as a result of it. But what has happened over the course of the last 25 years is something entirely different. It is mass migration on a level that in fact begins not just to divide and damage communities and potentially to set people apart from each other, which is dangerous, but also I think a feeling that perhaps something about our culture is directly under threat. That sense of who we are, and that this is a problem. And just think about the numbers. You know, Tony Blair came to power. Sedgefield boy, of course, it's all your fault up here, it really is. Tony Blair comes to power and opens the door. And bear in mind, for the previous 50 years, net migration had been 30, 40,000 a year. That's what it had been for 50 years. Tony Blair comes to power and opens the door. And net, over his premiership, 2.7 million people come. And the Conservatives accelerate it, because now nearly 4.5 million have come since they came to power. Now, you are suffering less with this problem in the northeast than certainly the southeast, where I'm from, where the roads are clogged beyond imagination. Access to a GP is pretty much impossible at short notice. And housing has become, for most young people, simply an unobtainable dream. And rents are up by 20 to 30% across the country in the last 4 years. It's a simple demand-supply equation. And that's why I've said from the start, this really should be the immigration election. I don't know whether you watched the debate last night between, no, you had better things to do, I can't say that I blame you. But if you did watch the debate last night, furious arguments on tax, furious arguments on immigration, furious arguments on the Channel boat crossings, a subject that I will return to, I promise you, it's my specialist subject. Furious arguments between them, and yet, in policy terms, there isn't really much to choose. In fact, the more they argued, the more they seemed the same. Has your phone stopped ringing? I'm so sorry to inconvenience you. I really, really am. Don't worry about it. I don't mean it. And so, we have a sense things are going wrong. And by the way, if you're self-employed out there, or running a small limited company, you know what I'm about to say, that neither front bench has any comprehension of who you are or what you do. None. But does the Labour Party offer any solutions? Well, to begin with the Conservatives, and it's worth saying here in the North East, of course, Sunderland, I'll never forget Sunderland, and the early hours of June the 24th, 2016, when I was feeling utterly depressed. The polls had closed. It was the end of a 25-year journey for me, because I'd just gone on relentlessly believing that the best people to govern Britain were the British people themselves. That was what I fought for all those years.
Got lots of legs, but...
And there we have it, Nigel Farage giving a rally to a packed crowd in County Durham. And of course, this is during the election campaign that has seen his party go from pretty standing start, rising, perhaps doubling in the polls. Interesting to see the size of the crowd there.
Yes, indeed. I heard over 1,000 people signed up to attend. Anyway, we're now joined from Westminster by Conservative peer, Lord Dominic Johnson. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Now, one of the questions last night at the debate was, are Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak really the best this country can do when it comes to a choice of leadership? Your thoughts?
Well, clearly, I think that Rishi Sunak is absolutely the best choice for Prime Minister. But I've just been listening before sort of feeding in now to Nigel Farage talking. And one of the things that's worried me over the last 6 weeks or so, and you've seen this, this is a fact, is that the vote share for the main political parties has started to decline. I think Labour have lost 10% of their vote because people are looking for, alternatives and plain-speaking language. And so it's very important that people like me come on fabulous shows like yours to try and make a case for the Conservatives to show that actually we're answering those questions that Nigel has just absolutely legitimately raised in his rally in Sunderland or wherever he is.
Yes, I think one of the things that came out of last night was the feeling that Rishi Sunak had finally started trying. There appeared to be some fire in the belly that had been missing. Did you get that feeling as well? It seemed as though, it'd been lacklustre up to this point, and he was decided that now's the time, 6 days of election campaigning left, to give it some welly.
Well, I don't. Again, you can imagine what I'm going to say, to be honest. But I genuinely don't agree with that. I mean, I think he's been amazing. He entered this election, frankly, behind in the polls. As simple as that. He went hard in. He called a surprise election in order to make sure that his message had some cut through with real punch. I thought he was great last night. I mean, I really love it. As a Tory, over the last few weeks, we've had a lot of top-line noise, which has distracted people from the core issues, which is which party philosophically is going to be able to run this country better from next Friday. And so by having him come out last night really left-right hooks on Starmer, who, I've got respect for. I don't go around saying, Starmer's nuts or whatever. I think he's a very sensible, pragmatic individual, but he just didn't have any answers for me. It's all nice platitudes, and I think that, Rishi did a fabulous job, and keep on going. We've got a week to go. It's a hell of a long time in politics.
It is a long time in politics, although, as you say, Rishi Sunak called this election 20 points behind in the polls, and 5 weeks later, here we are. The Conservative Party 20 points behind in the polls. It's not looking particularly profound. It's not looking particularly encouraging for the Conservative family. But, of course, Lord Johnson, you are the Minister for Regulatory Reform. And one of the big issues of this campaign has been the economy, which in the last monthly data we had was flatlining. Yes, we had fast growth in the first quarter of this year, but it has been a pretty low growth few years. We've been stuttering, dipping up and down, and really in the lower bounds of many countries that are developed around the world. One of the reasons might be because we haven't really performed all of that much regulatory innovation. We still have the vast bulk of European regulations on our statute books. They were transposed from EU law to UK law. So all that Brexit's done for us so far is create some barriers to trade with the continent without creating any advantages of scrapping the rules that perhaps Brexiteers wanted to see go.
Well, I've got a lot of sympathy with what you say, which is why I relished it when Kemi Badenoch gave me the chance to be the Minister for Regulatory Reform. Without getting technical, people I think are just overwhelmed with sort of facts and statistics. We actually did a very good job. Just at the end of the cycle, we produced a really powerful white paper insisting that the regulators have growth sort of injected like a hypodermic needle in Pulp Fiction, adrenaline to the heart, which I think will have massive benefits in the future. I just want to say one thing. I went to Taylor Swift on Saturday. I'm not just saying that just to show you how cool I am. I was taking my daughter, but I was thinking about it, bizarrely. The fact that Keir Starmer was there the day before, and I just popped into my mind. Keir Starmer is a civil servant. Rachel Reeves is a civil servant. Sue Gray is a civil servant. So if you think of the issues around regulation, and they're still significant, we have to free ourselves up more. Who is really going to deregulate the economy and provide regulatory reform? My worry is that truly, the blob is going to win. The machine is going to be, a civil service machine run by the civil service for the benefit of the civil service. Whereas the Tories, we've got Rishi Sunak as an investor, Jeremy Hunt's an entrepreneur, people like myself, Kevin Hollingray, Andrew Griffiths, all come from business. So if you're a small business out there watching this marvellous patriotic show, ask yourself this question: who do you want running the economy? The FCA, the Environment Agency, or the local planning authorities, or business people? It's really important. We've got to do more. I have sympathy with your point, but the only people who can achieve that are basically people like me and the Conservatives under Rishi Sunak.
OK, well, thank you very much indeed for joining us on the show. Lots of flattery there too about our programme. Lord Dominic Johnson, thank you very much indeed. Well, let's get the thoughts now of political commentator Benedict Spence, who is still with us in the studio. It was interesting what he said there about how Reform are talking common language, speaking to the people. It seems that one of the problems the Conservatives have is they don't seem to agree on what the problem has been for the Conservatives, whether they need to go more to the left, whether they need to go more to the right.
That is sort of the common theme, isn't it? That the Conservative Party has decided to start a fight with itself, ultimately, and that's what sort of every leadership contest is. And it's a really great moment to do it sort of just as you're entering the election cycle and then to carry it on through. Obviously, we will see that when we have the next leadership contest, although given how few MPs they might have, who knows actually whether or not it'll be a particularly exciting conversation if there's, only 60 and most of them are One Nation Conservatives. It won't be much of a conversation then. But I don't tend to look at this as a sort of a wipeout, an extinction event. I know that lots of people are saying 0 seats, this is the end of the Conservatives. I simply don't think that a party that has as much invested in it and is invested as much into the fabric of British political life will just disappear over the night. For a party that has no real organisation, no real ground game, isn't really a party, has a very charismatic leader who, as you say, is in touch with what a lot of people feel is the problem in this country. But beyond that, there simply isn't very much there.
Yes,
and
in some ways, this is not the Reform project. This is the Farage project.
Yeah.
Reform was around 7-8% in the polls when it was led by someone else.
Yeah.
Farage comes back. It's all Farage's rallies. It's all Farage standing. It's all Farage.
Yeah.
there are some parallels there to Donald Trump.
Yeah, I think that's the most accurate, obviously, comparison. Some people might say it's quite lazy, but, who else have we got to compare it to right now? But that is sort of my point, is that behind Nigel Farage, there isn't very much. In much the same way as, actually, there isn't very much behind Donald Trump. Once you take him out of the equation, what is there for the Republican Party except the old guard? Nigel Farage is not a spring chicken. He's been around for a very long time. And actually, at any moment, he might decide...
He's younger than Keir Starmer.
He is, but still, that doesn't necessarily mean... It doesn't mean that Keir Starmer's necessarily going to last very long. I do think that just because we have all of these sort of people approaching the sort of the golden years of their life in politics, doesn't mean that they're all going to stick around.
Gladstone ran an empire in his 80s.
Gladstone, well, I don't think he did it all by himself.
With his hands.
70s or his 80s?
I don't think he was quite as hands-on as that picture sort of portrays. There were rather a lot of civil servants running around for him, perhaps slightly better qualified than the current crop of civil servants. But that's sort of my point, is that in many ways this is an opportunity for the Conservatives. The wipeout event, which is going to happen, isn't going to kill them overnight. And it does mean that if they are able to look at what Farage is doing particularly well, but also look at what Labour's doing particularly well, because it is doing some things. It's not entirely simply because, well, you're not the Conservatives, so I'll vote for you. If they're able to sort of touch on the mood of the country, there is the possibility there, much like a forest fire, devastating, but the possibility of regrowth. The question is that what the Conservative Party wants to do? Because it's going to be a very difficult process to go through.
And that will be a very interesting process if the polls are to be believed and the Conservatives are out of government. What do they do next? How do they reshape the party? What sort of leader do they take on and have? Very interesting. Lots of discussions, I'm sure, to come on that one.
Oh, no doubt, no doubt. many months
Thank you, Benedict.
away. Yes, coming up, more strikes. Junior doctors commence their 5-day strike in an ongoing dispute over pay. We're going to be outside a hospital after these messages. This is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News.
Hi there, welcome along to the latest forecast from the Met Office for GB News. It's very warm in the southeast this afternoon, but it is turning much cooler during the next day or so across the whole of the UK as this unseasonably deep low moves into the northwest, and that's going to bring some increasingly strong winds, gusts into the 40s miles an hour across western Scotland and Northern Ireland. Could cause some ferry disruption, some bridge closures, and it's also going to make it feel unpleasant with spiralling bands of rain reaching western Scotland and Northern Ireland, showers for northern England, parts of Wales and the southwest with a lot of cloud here and much cooler, but we keep the warmth in the southeast, at least for the first few hours of the afternoon. Temperatures into the high 20s once again. Before that, cooler air sweeps across the whole of the UK, and it's certainly going to feel cool with some heavy rain clearing Shetland during the afternoon and some also persistent wet weather pushing into western Scotland, Northern Ireland, the winds staying brisk. And we've got 1 or 2 showers into Wales and the southwest. A lot of cloud here compared with recent days, but it stays clear across East Anglia and the southeast during the evening. And overnight we keep the clear spells here whilst bands of rain and showers push through Scotland, Northern England, North Wales and Northern Ireland. So a north-south contrast overnight. The winds staying strong across the country, but temperatures lower compared with recent nights, so perhaps more comfortable for sleeping in those areas where we've had the muggy air persisting. In the south, it's a fine start to Friday, some sunshine first thing, and it stays mostly dry, albeit rather cloudy, cool and breezy. Further north, we've got lots of showers pushing into North Wales, Northern England, Scotland and Northern Ireland. Some heavy downpours, but the rain less persistent. Nevertheless, it's going to stay cool in the north, temperatures close to average in the south.
The latest GB News travel.
Hello, good morning to you. I'm Jules Buckley. Glasgow, the westbound M8 at junction 19, that's Anderston Cross, is still queuing, though the earlier police incidents cleared. Still seeing patchy queues back towards Fruit Market, though, junction 14. Southbound M42 remains closed off, junction 10 down to 9. Now that's Tamworth down towards Coles Hill for emergency repairs. A big queues on surrounding routes. Westbound M4 on Bristol, junction 19 to 20, that's the M32 to the M5 turn off. The 2 out of 4 lanes coned off, a breakdown there causing big delays. Southbound A12 at Essex, junction 29, the Crown interchange down to junction 27 is closed and queuing at the scene of a collision. And the coastbound M20 in Kent away from Leeds Castle at 8, a lane shut as a vehicle there undergoes a tyre change.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 42 minutes past midday. Now, junior doctors have commenced their 5-day strike in an ongoing dispute over pay.
Yes, the British Medical Association, the BMA, announced the walkout last month. They're demanding a 35% pay rise to make up for what they say are 15 years of below-inflation rises.
Well, it's the 11th such strike since March 2023, despite back-and-forth negotiations with the government, and perhaps most perniciously, it's in the run-up to our general election.
Yes, indeed. Well, let's find out a bit more from our West Midlands reporter, Jack Carson, who joins us from Queen Elizabeth Hospital in Birmingham. Are people out there protesting?
Well, the picket line was 8 a.m. till 10 a.m. this morning. It was quite well attended by members of the British Medical Association, those junior doctors that are out on strike today. Chants of claps don't pay the bills on the picket line this morning from those members. But the Chief Executive of the NHS Federation, Matthew Taylor, has said that this strike, and this 11th strike, is a bitter pill to swallow. Of course, we know that the last main strike from the junior doctors was back in February. Of course, the NHS at that point dealing with those winter waiting lists, dealing with those winter patients. Now we're in a pressure of a different kind, of course, with the most recent heat wave, those yellow weather warnings that exist across the country. We know the problems that the severe heat can cause, of course, with those already with pre-existing respiratory and heart conditions. But the junior doctors say that they still haven't come to a resolution, of course, over this long-running pay dispute. 35% is the aim. They say that's what they've been denied over the past 15 years. Now, of course, the government had come to some kind of semi-agreement with the junior doctors to give them a 9% pay rise this year, of course, after an independent body said that that was the amount that they should get, and the government were in talks for a further 3%. The British Medical Association walked away from those talks, saying that it wasn't good enough, and they said the reason that they've taken this strike action is because there is no credible option on the table. But of course, in the middle of a general election, it can't not be seen as partly, really political, because of course there was this kind of independent arbitration between the government and the BMA, but of course that ended when the general election was called, and then we get, of course, the strike which has started today and runs until the 2nd of July. Now, we spoke to Dr. Arjan Singh from the Executive Junior Doctors Committee at the British Medical Association. Here's what he told me.
Our pay at the moment for a doctor in their first year is £15.50. We're asking for that to be £21. £21 an hour for a doctor that's starting life-saving treatment on our loved ones. £21 an hour for a doctor with student loans of £100,000. And because the pay cut has been so strong, we're losing doctors. We don't have enough. And when we don't have enough doctors, we're seeing patients die needlessly in the NHS every single week.
Well, of course, that's the view of our Dr. Arjan Singh from the British Medical Association there. Now, the main kind of public support, of course, is still with the junior doctors, but there is some more frustration that's currently, creeping in, really, with the amount of cancelled appointments. 1.5 million appointments and operations have been cancelled because of the strike action within the NHS in England. That's estimated at a cost of £3 billion. The British Medical Association say the blame lays with the government for not making them a critical and credible offer.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Jack Carson. You're in Birmingham for us. Thank you very much. It's a curious timing, isn't it, Tom? Right before a general election,
doesn't it?
Well, I don't think you can deny that, really. I'm not sure they're even denying it, really.
No. But then we speak to Labour representative after Labour representative who have not in their manifesto allocated a single penny for junior doctors. Not one penny for junior doctors. And they say, oh, don't worry, all of our pledges are fully funded, fully costed, they're all in our manifesto. Which either means they're not going to make an accommodation with the junior doctors, or if they do, well, That's some funding that is not allocated in their manifesto, and what does that mean?
Yes, do you think Wes Streeting is just hoping that they'll be a bit nicer to a Labour government? That the unions will just, roll over and say, all right, we won't demand 35 anymore.
Either they're taking the junior doctors for fools, or they're taking the British public for fools. There is no middle ground here. Either they stick to the manifesto and the costings in the manifesto and don't give a single penny extra to junior doctors, or they do find more money for junior doctors, and that means more tax for the rest of us.
You got Victoria Atkins saying, well, every time we sit down, they walk out, but then the junior doctors say the same about the government. So there you go, a stalemate at the moment. But coming up, the search for Jay Slater takes a rather bizarre turn. Locals are saying the teenager was sighted watching the Euros. Surely not. More on that shortly.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Almost half of those seeking to have an affair are happier with their job than with their primary relationship. But what exactly does a cheater do for a living?
Well, medical assistants and nurses, surprisingly, top the lists of professions for female cheaters. And it's jobs in IT or tech for male cheaters, which I think is less of a surprise.
No.
This is all according to a survey by the dating site Ashley Madison.
OK, so why do people cheat? To answer this, we're joined now by broadcaster and psychotherapist Lucy Beresford. Good morning, Lucy.
Morning, Lucy.
So, is it OK of me to say naughty nurses in this day and age? Am I going to get cancelled for that?
You're out.
Yeah, I'm out.
Been
Gone.
cancelled.
See ya.
There's the door.
But yes, you're talking about the caring professions, and I think it's very appropriate.
I'm surprised by that.
Women, well, because they're very nurturing, very loving, very giving, whereas the males who are in tech and IT, very strategic.
Is there a link between high-pressure jobs, maybe nurses infamously, you know, they're working long hours, underpaid, stressed out? Is there a link between jobs of that nature and cheating, maybe as a relief?
Absolutely. Is it just about sex? Or is it about emotional connection? Is it about emotional validation? And increasingly, people are discovering that their primary relationship is just not a place where they feel safe.
This survey found that personality didn't actually come into it that much. It was about half and half if you're an introvert or an extrovert that you'd be likely to have an affair.
I think that's right. And I think that just speaks to the fact that all people want to have a good emotional connection. So it doesn't matter whether you're really social or whether you're someone who has to recharge your batteries in private time, that actually we only ever want three things in life. We want to feel safe, we want to feel loved, but we also want to feel heard. And in increasingly number of marriages and long-term relationships, we get into grooves, we get into ruts, and we stop hearing our partner, we stop listening to them, and they stop listening to us.
The People's Channel.
Congratulations to the GB News winners at this year's Trick Awards.
And the winner of Interview of the Year is... Alistair Stewart reveals his heartbreaking diagnosis to Camilla Tormini.
And the winner is GB News Breakfast. And the winner is Nigel Farage.
And thank you to you, our GB News viewers and listeners, for making us the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
This is GB News, and we are Britain's election channel.
This vote may seem to be about the politicians and the media, but it's actually about you. We won't forget that.
Join us up and down the country as we follow every moment together.
More than ever, it's important to hear all sides
as you make your decision in the run-up to polling day.
This is GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's election channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 9 minutes to 1. Now, the latest on the search for Lancashire teenager Jay Slater, who, of course, went missing in Tenerife just 11 days ago.
Yes, the mayor of a town close to where Jay disappeared claims that some locals think they saw the 19-year-old watching the Euros. Let's find out some more from Charlie Peters, our reporter, who's been covering this story for us. It's not just that locals have spotted... claim that they've spotted Jay Slater watching the Euros, which, of course, has been since he went missing. But also, we're hearing quite a lot about this GoFundMe page. Can you tell us more?
Well, firstly, on the sighting on the CCTV, it's important to stress this is an unconfirmed report. And the timing is interesting as well, because the CCTV footage is 10 hours after he officially went missing last Monday, the 17th. So 10 hours, that 8:50 location ping on his phone off the beaten track in the rural Deteno area in northwest Tenerife. Now, this is a village about 3.5 miles away from that location, so it's possible you could have reached that in 10 hours, but this is last Monday. There's been no further updates since, and reporters in that village say that they haven't actually had further confirmed reports. We do know that the mayor of that town is saying that the police and the civil guard are looking at that footage gathered by private investigators, a team that works there. Now, onto the GoFundMe, Debbie Duncan, the mother of Jay Slater, said that as they've now reached over £36,000, she said in an update released on the page that she's going to release some of those funds to support the mountain rescue teams in the northwest of the island, but also because she and her family have extended their stay on the island and they need to cover accommodation and food. So some of the funds will be used for that purpose. The original goal was £30,000. It's growing quite significantly by the hour, and this latest appeal is likely going to contribute to that. But as this case goes on, the questions are growing as well. Many people are wondering how on earth could this 19-year-old just have vanished into thin air?
No, it is a curious case. However, thinking about what the local mayor has been saying about these sightings, I mean, it's just people saying they think they saw him. Can we put these pretty safely into the bucket of sightings where people might also be seeing Elvis or Diana or Tupac Shakur?
Yeah, well, it's a very grainy image, and the timing does make it highly, highly unlikely that it actually was Jay Slater. And it seems increasingly as though people on the island are clutching at some straws here for this investigation, while the bulk of the effort is still in the northwest of Tenerife, in that mountainous area, in that region, as they continue to search for his last known location.
It's all very, very curious, isn't it? Thank you so much, Charlie Peters, our reporter. Keep covering that story for us. We've got a lot to get through, don't we?
We certainly do, because we're going to be heading stateside in just a moment for yet another debate, although this one is the first in a different executive election. Yes, Donald Trump is gearing up to face Joe Biden this very evening. We're going to bring you all of the hype and the preparations after this.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi there, welcome along to the latest forecast from the Met Office for GB News. It's very warm in the southeast this afternoon, but it is turning much cooler during the next day or so across the whole of the UK as this unseasonably deep low moves into the northwest, and that's going to bring some increasingly strong winds, gusts into the 40s miles an hour across western Scotland and Northern Ireland. Could cause some ferry disruption, some bridge closures, and it's also going to make it feel unpleasant with spiralling bands of rain reaching western Scotland and Northern Ireland, showers for northern England, parts of Wales and the southwest with a lot of cloud here and much cooler, but we keep the warmth in the southeast at least for the first few hours of the afternoon. Temperatures into the high 20s once again. Before that, cooler air sweeps across the whole of the UK, and it's certainly going to feel cool with some heavy rain clearing Shetland during the afternoon and some also persistent wet weather pushing into western Scotland, Northern Ireland, the winds staying brisk. And we've got one or two showers into Wales and the southwest. A lot of cloud here compared with recent days, but it stays clear across East Anglia and the southeast during the evening. And overnight we keep the clear spells here whilst bands of rain and showers push through Scotland, Northern England, North Wales and Northern Ireland. So a north-south contrast overnight. The winds staying strong across the country, but temperatures lower compared with recent nights, so perhaps more comfortable for sleeping in those areas where we've had the muggy air persisting. In the south, it's a fine start to Friday, some sunshine first thing, and it stays mostly dry, albeit rather cloudy, cool and breezy. Further north, we've got lots of showers pushing into North Wales, Northern England, Scotland and Northern Ireland. Some heavy downpours, but the rain less persistent. Nevertheless, it's going to stay cool in the north, temperatures close to average in the south.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
It's the final week to see how you can win big this summer. First, there's a fabulous £15,000 in tax-free cash to ensure this summer is special. What would you spend that on? Next, you'll also receive the latest iPhone 15 and a set of Apple AirPods. And finally, £500 to spend at your favourite UK attraction. You have to hurry as lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday. For another chance to win the iPhone, treats and £15,000 cash, text prize to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. You can also enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries cost £2 or post your name and number to GB06 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Britain's Newsroom. Weekday mornings from 9:30.
So there was a calf that was run down by a Surrey police car. It's now being nursed back to health, according to the family who own the farm that the calf escaped from.
Well, he didn't just run him over once, he ran him over twice.
No, we're not showing you the footage. The footage is really shocking. But the police officer who was driving this vehicle has now been taken off frontline duties until a full investigation is completed. And I feel like I'm yet again the only person in the country who thinks the police officer was just doing his job. That police officer, probably a young guy who's got dual carriageways left, right and centre in that area. Do you know what the most popular business is in that area in Feltham?
Farming.
McDonald's drive-through. It's got a queue round the block anytime you go around that area. And all those people queuing for McDonald's who are now outraged that this poor cow had to die.
Because it's going to be at McDonald's at some point.
At some point he was going to die. I'm really sorry. If you eat meat, you can't be upset by a cow dying. I think the fast roads with cars at 10 o'clock at night in the dark, they're not expecting a cow to walk out in the middle of the night. There would have been a massive pile-up. Then there'd been, like, who knows how many people dead. And then the police would have been criticised for not neutralising the threat.
The thing is, it was because he did... why... You could see the first time, the calf could barely stand up. I just don't get why I had to then go and do it a second time.
Well, I suppose at that point it's a bit like if you run over like a deer on the side of the road, you know, and if the police they're going to kill the animal to put it out of its misery. That's all I can presume. And the guy's not trained. This is Feltham. It isn't Texas. He's not going to come out with a lasso. He doesn't know what to do.
Where did this happen, Feltham?
Feltham. I'm sure the inbox is now going to be full of people saying, "Bev, you're outrageous. You lack compassion."
No, there will be people who agree with you. But if it had been done once, that was enough. But I don't think it needed to do it the second time.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Right, well, good afternoon, Britain. It's 1 o'clock on Thursday, the 27th of June. I'm Emily Carver.
And I'm Tom Harwood.
The final fiery face-off. Sir Keir Starmer says he was very pleased with the TV head-to-head last night, despite plenty of onlookers saying Prime Minister Rishi Sunak came out on top. We'll be having our very own debate on who won.
Sticking with debates, we're going to be heading across the pond to look ahead to Trump taking on Biden tonight. Will either of them be able to stay awake? And will the incumbent president be up for the fight?
Rude. And Reform have rallied in Durham with Nigel Farage reassuring voters he's the candidate connecting with the younger generation, adding this is the immigration election.
And away from the politics, we'll be catching up on the royal family as Prince Harry opens up about the difficulties of coping with bereavement.
Yes, well, we did show you a little bit of Nigel Farage's rally up in Durham, and he was insisting, yes, as we said, that he is grabbing the attention of young people. And it stands to reason because on the old TikTok, he's flying ahead, isn't he? He's flying ahead of the competition.
He does have that perhaps more simple, more bombastic message, while you have Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer trying to project stability and authority. Nigel Farage is the only candidate who seems to be going out there and having a bit of fun, apart from maybe Ed Davey. Although the sort of fun that Ed Davey is having is a bit more of a embarrassing dad rather than Nigel Farage's perhaps more risque humour on occasions. But I think this feeds into something that is pretty profound phenomenon in continental Europe. If you look at the age brackets that are backing the sort of nationalist right parties in France, in Germany, in Italy, very often it's actually the Generation Z, the youngest cohort of those who are able to vote, that are voting for those more radical right-wing parties. It's almost like you've got a U-shaped curve of those who back them, those older voters and those much younger voters.
Yes, I mean, it may say something about young people, often rebellious, sick of the major parties winning everything. Perhaps it's about that, or the appeal is just there, more radical style policies.
I think it's no surprise that you're seeing young people going for the Greens and for reform. It is. I mean, everyone's a bit more radical when they're younger, I think. But could this be Keir Starmer's Achilles heel if he introduced votes at 16? Could it come back to bite him?
That's a very interesting question. Let us know if you know any rebellious young people who are deciding to vote reform, or at least are supporting them. It's quite interesting, this TikTok phenomenon. Anyway, gbnews.com/your say. Let's get the headlines with Tatiana.
Emily, thank you and good afternoon. The top stories: the number of Metropolitan Police officers under investigation over bets on the timing of the general election has risen to at least 7. The force says one, a protection officer assigned to the Prime Minister, was arrested last week on suspicion of misconduct in public office. He's been bailed and is subject to restricted duties. A further 6 officers have been identified as having placed bets on the timing of the election. The Met says the Gambling Commission continues to investigate those cases, but the Met's Directorate of Professional Standards is being kept informed. At least 5 Conservatives are being investigated by the Gambling Commission as part of its inquiry into bets. Labour has also been dragged into the row, suspending one candidate after he was investigated by the regulator for betting on himself to lose his seat. Sir Keir Starmer says the Labour government would work with whoever's in power in France on tackling migrant channel crossings. The Labour leader and Rishi Sunak have returned to the campaign trail today after they clashed over illegal immigration and the betting row in a TV debate last night. Sir Keir accused the Prime Minister of being bullied into taking action in the betting scandal, while Mr Sunak repeatedly warned voters not to surrender to Labour's tax and migration plans. The Prime Minister says the country is in danger under a potential Labour government with a leader who, he says, has no plans.
Keir Starmer changes his mind on almost every major position that he has taken. Right? And times that we're living in, you need leadership which has the courage of its convictions. That's what I have. You have to ask yourself, why is he not telling you his plan for the country, what he wants to do? Because he probably doesn't think you're going to like it when you hear it. Right? We know, as you saw last night, those of you that were watching the debate, absolutely no answers about how to tackle immigration. Right? I've got a plan. We're bringing immigration down. We've got a plan to stop the boats. He would make us the soft touch of Europe when it comes to that issue.
Well, Sir Keir Starmer has today told GB News that this issue is much more than just a border issue.
Record numbers of people are coming here in small boats. He's lost control of our borders, literally lost control, not only of the numbers that are coming, but also who's coming. And so this is not just a border issue, it's a national security issue. The deterrent is smashing the gangs that are running this vile trade so that nobody gets into a boat to cross the channel. The Prime Minister is simply interested in a gimmick, the Rwanda scheme, for people who've already arrived here, a few hundred people.
A man understood to be a member of the Labour Party who was arrested in connection with the so-called Westminster honey trap scandal has been released on bail. The Met Police says the arrest relates to an investigation being carried out by its parliamentary liaison and investigation team following reports of unsolicited messages sent to MPs and others. Junior doctors in England are walking off the job for an 11th time in almost a year. Medics are warning that more strike action could take place in the summer if the next government doesn't move forward negotiations in a timely manner. Medics are walking out for 5 days this time in their long-running dispute over pay. Junior doctors want a 35% pay increase. The British Medical Association has said it's ready to talk, and the union has already had some discussions with the Labour Party. The BMA insists their junior members are historically underpaid.
Our pay at the moment for a doctor in their first year is £15.50. We're asking for that to be £21. £21 an hour for a doctor that's starting life-saving treatment on our loved ones. £21 an hour for a doctor with student loans of £100,000. And because the pay cut has been so strong, we're losing doctors. We don't have enough. And when we don't have enough doctors, we're seeing patients die needlessly in the NHS every single week.
The mother of a British teenager who went missing in Tenerife says some of the money raised by a crowdfunding appeal will be withdrawn to help with the search for her son. The appeal has so far raised more than £36,000. Debbie Duncan has thanked the public for their support, kind messages and good wishes. Jay's now been missing for 11 days. Yesterday, Spanish police searched a mountainous area by helicopter, with sniffer dogs also being used on the ground. He'd gone on a holiday for the first time without his parents. And Kenyan police have fired tear gas at protesters and put up roadblocks on streets leading to the presidential palace as protests continue against the country's government. They have vowed to occupy State House despite President Ruto's climb down on proposed tax hikes that sparked a week of demonstrations. Ruto is grappling with the most serious crisis of his 2-year-old presidency as the youth-led protest movement has grown rapidly, demanding a political overhaul. And those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Tatiana Sanchez. More in half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 8 minutes past 1. Now, yesterday evening, Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer took part in their final televised debate before voters head to the polls next week. I'm sure voters will also be going to the polls. There's no restriction on any aquatic activity. Perhaps you'll meet Ed Davey while you're voting.
He's the most likely, probably.
I think so.
Or Nigel Farage.
Yeah, I haven't seen Nigel on a boat yet.
He was on a boat, wasn't he? Anyway, there were fiery clashes on issues including illegal immigration, tax and net zero, with the pair even being asked if they were really the best candidates the UK had to be Prime Minister.
Mr Sunak, I think you made a fair job of being Chancellor, but you're a pretty mediocre Prime Minister. Sir Keir, I think that your strings are being pulled by very senior members of the Labour Party. Are you two really the best we've got to be the next Prime Minister of our great country?
Right, well, there you go, the question of the night, some say. Well, let's get the thoughts of political commentator Benedict Spence, who's with us in the studio. It's interesting, isn't it? Sometimes there are those questions that just get picked up. They capture the imagination, perhaps the mood of the nation, that it's these two.
Yes, I think... Do you know what, though? I find it very sort of frustrating how actually everything sort of has to be framed to these sorts of very emotional individual questions.
Yes.
It's sort of like it's your moment to shine and you're going to perhaps talk about your individual circumstances. And everybody understands people have got very difficult individual circumstances. But really, you know, there's a lack, I think, of actual diving down into the policies of all of this. And it's one of the things that I do get it. You want to hear what people have to say because they are the voters after all. But does it ever really tell you anything that you didn't already know? I'm struggling because of X, Y, Z. Well, yes, I think that's kind of why everybody's polling very badly. What I find very frustrating is, you know, amidst all the sort of the issues that the Conservatives have had, the Labour Party, I think, have been able to sort of bobble along the surface without enough people diving down into the sort of the details of their policies. I'm sorry to go off at a bit of a tangent, but you know, you said it, and it's something that really I find people don't learn very much about these debates, as much as it might sort of capture the imagination, because people might go, yes, I agree. It doesn't really change.
I think we learned quite a lot when they were allowed to just have a bit of a shouting match, have a bit of a Barney between them, because they both poked holes in each other's argument.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of Rishi Sunak over the illegal migration, pushing, jabbing Keir Starmer on that question.
I mean, no question that that is going to be a difficult thing for Keir Starmer, because actually if you do then step back and look at what his policies are, we're going to have a new sort of border command centre, and you go, well, OK, what's that going to do? And he said, I am going to start deporting people back to Bangladesh or wherever. Absolutely no question about, again, diving into the details about how he's going to do that, and he will know as well as anybody else the serious legal constraints that he will face as Prime Minister to do that. And again, I think it, as you say, it echoes the sort of the, I don't want to say animosity, but the frustration of the country, that people go, well, what's going to happen there? And then to see the two men going at each other over this, OK, it's a bit of entertainment. It's nice to know that they're a bit passionate. But again, are we left any the wiser as to actually how Labour, and it is going to be Labour, are going to deal with this issue? I'm not so sure.
No, it's fascinating because the Labour Party's proposal for a small boats command, well, there's already a command that deals with small boats. The only difference is that they'll be adding in the security services to that command. And I wonder, actually, if when you're looking at very surface-level debates, ultimately it's how the individuals come across more than actually what they say. And I'm reminded, perhaps, of 1992 in the United States. There was a very, very famous debate with Bill Clinton and George H.W. Bush. And a member of the audience asked this question: how does the national debt personally affect you?
Yeah.
And it's a nonsense question. I mean, how do you respond to that? Well, H.W. Bush went first, and he said, well, it has a lot to do with interest rates, and, like, sounded very technocratic. Bill Clinton sat down next to her, basically didn't answer the question at all, but just said, you know, I get how really tough it is. When people lose their jobs in my state, I know them by name. And he just connected, even though he didn't answer the question at all. And sometimes that's just what you got to do.
It is what you've got to do. And I'm reminded of another US debate. This was on sort of at the onset of television. I think it was Kennedy and Nixon, where where people who watched the television thought Kennedy had won, and everybody who listened to it on the radio thought Nixon had won. And it was entirely because
5 o'clock stubble
because Nixon looked
sweaty.
He looked like Richard Nixon, and Kennedy looked like JFK.
I think Nixon refused makeup for that debate, whereas JFK was always caked in makeup.
Yeah, I mean, well, obviously JFK knew what he was doing in those circumstances. But again, it's that sort of sense of, OK, maybe this individual feels a bit better, maybe he feels a bit more on your side, a bit more personable. But at the same time, do we get the impression from either major candidate that you're sat there thinking, oh, yes, this is a perfectly normal person, he's completely in touch? Keir Starmer feels robotic. That's not a sort of a cheap shot at him. He does feel like he's very out of his comfort zone. When they have these one-on-one debates, actually, he does look slightly shaky and, frankly, slightly irritated sometimes when people deign to ask him questions. Rumpole of the Bailey, he is not. Rishi Sunak tries really, really hard. Too hard. He comes across as a try-hard.
The thing is, I think Rishi Sunak probably had more applause than he's used to with these things. It was quite surprising how many times the claps came out.
Yeah.
But he... sorry, I forgot what I was going to say, because you interrupted me there. Go on.
Oh, sorry. I don't know. I think everyone was a bit surprised seeing those claps.
But again, the pressure is off Rishi Sunak now. Actually, there's nothing really riding on this apart from maybe keeping his own seat. And it's that kind of situation where, OK, if you look at, say, what Farage is doing, he's going on the grandstand, he's going on tour, he's taking pot shots at everybody, it's going quite well. If you're Rishi and you've gone through all of the different scandals, all of the different mess-ups, you might as well actually have a bit of fun with it, relax a little bit, take a few blows and also take a few risks, because what's the worst that's going to happen? Your party's going to be wiped out.
Well, I mean, I suppose that is the worst that might happen.
Yeah.
I wonder, though, looking at these historical precedents, are we too televised? And I recognise we're saying this sitting in a television studio. I recognise, I can see the irony in this conversation. Would Abraham Lincoln have ever become US president if there was a television camera in his face? Would some of the, I don't know, Gladstone have ever won an election if he had to win it on televisual ability?
Well, for all we know, for the time, they might have been very charismatic. We have nothing really to compare it with. But I think you're right in the sense that we set a lot of store by these television debates. But actually, if you look at the sort of the culture of politics in this country, with the exception of people like Boris Johnson and maybe Tony Blair, although then you're sort of having to go back a little bit of a way, we don't have the sort of the big characters like they do in the United States or even like they do in France, where they have those sort of sat across a table televised debates where actually it's sort of barnstorming viewing, because they do kind of get into it quite a bit. It's very entertaining and enlightening. We don't really have that sort of culture. And for all we talk about the bear pit of Prime Minister's questions, actually more often than not, you're kind of sat there going, did I learn anything from this? This is dire.
I mean, some people were annoyed that it was only the two. representatives there. Only the two leaders of the Conservatives and Labour represented. Liberal Democrats not to be seen. Nigel Farage not to be seen.
I think given that there is a realistic prospect that the Conservatives might, in fact, not even come second, I don't think it's an unfair question to ask, actually, why is it that the Liberal Democrats and, to be fair, given the polling reform, aren't there? When it gets into the minor parties who aren't standing across the country, I think it's fair to say, what's the point in having these people here? People in England can't vote for them, people in Wales can't vote for them. But those four, given the current polling trends, I really do think it would have been better if we had had those four. And as much as anything else, actually, I think it could have worked in Rishi Sunak's favour, because actually, has he had the opportunity? He's had the opportunity to have a go at Keir Starmer. He's not really had the opportunity to have a go at Nigel Farage one-on-one. Maybe he'd do quite well. If the gloves are off and the pressure is off, why not dive down into Farage's policies and say, OK, I'm having a bad time, you've had a go at me, now let's see what you're made of? Because we don't know unless we see that, and we haven't seen it.
A big risk.
Good television, perhaps. Thank you very much indeed, Benedict Spence, political commentator. Coming up, the Dutch Olympics Committee have defended the selection of a convicted child rapist for their beach volleyball team. We'll have more on that shocking story very shortly.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Giovanni is axed following growing allegations of threatening and abusive behaviour.
We won't see his little toes dancing around the dance floor again, which is a shame.
Was it the BBC saying, you know, we've had some bad publicity about this star, do we need to maybe let him go? Or was it Giovanni himself saying that, you know, he's had to, with all the bad publicity and what's the allegations against him, he's walked away? We don't exactly know. But what we do know is that Amanda Abingdon, who he was coupled with last year on the last series of Strictly, left claiming that she had nasty behaviour from him in rehearsals when they were training for their routines. And she's also been diagnosed with PTSD, which she is blaming or claiming happened because of the training that she was put under Giovanni. It's very sad because I've met Giovanni on quite a few occasions, and he comes across as a very nice gentleman, actually, and the fans absolutely love him. And even though the allegations are out there against him, everybody I speak to in terms of the fans are on his side.
I mean, from the fans' point of view, they don't see what goes on behind the scenes. All they see is an incredibly gifted dancer who we're seeing footage of now.
It might come out later, but there's all sorts of things coming out because after Amanda came out and claimed all this behaviour against him, a male celebrity last week also came out and voiced their opinion. Yeah, a lot of fans will be gutted, but as you say, we don't know the full story yet as what's gone on.
And it's incredible pressure that no one's allowed to be, a duffer right from the start now.
I mean, it's one thing learning lines if you're an actor, but it's a different kettle of fish altogether if you're learning moves that you've never done before. So you've got...
The People's Channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is the nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Congratulations to the GB News winners at this year's Trick Awards.
And the winner of Interview of the Year is... Alistair Stewart reveals his heartbreaking diagnosis to Camilla Tominey.
And the winner is GB News Breakfast. And the winner is Nigel Farage.
And thank you to you, our GB News viewers and listeners, for making us the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Isabel Webster. Thanks for joining us on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Since winning the right to vote more than 100 years ago, women have been targeted by politicians hoping to attract their support.
Well, yes, and in this general election, it's no different. Leaders are proudly stating their party is the one for women. But come July the 4th, how much power do female voters have as values in society shift?
Well, our East Midlands reporter Will Hollis has been chasing this story.
Joe's great-great-grandmother, suffragette Alice Hawkins, was on the front line of the fight for the right to vote.
This is the sash that Alice wore when she was a suffragette. She wore it to meetings, demonstrations, whenever she spoke.
Arrested and imprisoned 5 times, the working-class woman sacrificed in her lifetime to earn voting rights for women everywhere in Britain today.
Whenever they demonstrated, the police were very aggressive. There's no doubt that they were the victims of police brutality, but it just didn't stop them.
In Leicester, a statue celebrates Alice and the suffragette cause. 100 years on, people seeking power watch voter trends eagerly. So, which issues matter to women here?
My thing is for the NHS. Women's rights, obviously.
The future for the kids, for the children.
Ahead of the general election, the main parties are trying to attract voters from key groups and demographics, framing themselves as the party for business, for the environment and for women.
There are groups of women that parties target, and that is sensible.
Professor of Politics Rosie Campbell suggests that women tend to focus on education and the NHS when voting, whereas for men, the economy and Europe matter more.
Our lives are still, to some extent, organised around gender, and men's and women's lives are a little bit different still.
Why do we not seem to talk about the men's vote in the same way that we do the female vote?
One of the reasons we focus on women in this way is that elections, we're really interested in undecided voters who will vote. And women make up the majority of undecided voters, but they're just as likely to turn out on election day. So if you want to go and persuade people late in the campaign to vote for you, women are massively overrepresented in that group.
A recent YouGov poll looking at voting intentions for the coming election found women are more likely to vote Labour or Green than men, with Reform more likely to attract male voters. The Conservatives, Lib Dems and SNP have a more equal voting share across genders. The role of women in electing the next government is still to be seen. But for Joe, in memory of the suffragettes like Alice, the result matters less than the taking part.
If you want a voice in this world, if you want to impact the changes that are needed, then you have to vote. It's as simple as that.
A single vote can change the direction of Britain, a power that is held equally. Will Hollis, GB News, Leicester.
Women don't vote as a collective.
Yeah, I can see how it's sort of annoying to say, well, what do women think, as if that's sort of one opinion.
Well, so maybe we might care more about childcare allowance, and that might sway our votes as a big collective.
I suppose there are women's issues, but I do think, I mean, it is interesting. Sometimes this sort of stereotypical view of things, it sort of ignores that, like, women are all individuals.
What about the men's vote? You don't hear that, do you? It's a bit patronising.
Maybe we should do
we're going to do the men's vote. Oh, wait, no, everyone knows that men all vote differently. Huh, probably the same with women. Probably the same with women.
I was actually surprised looking at those vote shares from that poll that showed men and women. They were basically about the same for each party. I mean, with a little bit of difference, women slightly more to the left, apart from those voting for Reform UK, which on that poll, 15% of men and just 10% of women, which is quite a large gap.
It's quite interesting, and I wonder how many of those are young men, because we talk quite a lot about how young men and young women are going further and further apart when it comes to politics. Young women, more naturally liberal, progressive, one might say, and then, young men going a bit more to the right, more conservative. Don't know how true that is in this particular election, but it's interesting to think about.
It is, because Margaret Thatcher got a majority of women. It used to be that women voted more Conservative. Right the way through. I think more women voted Conservative in 2010 even, but it started to shift in the last decade or so. And I think maybe Nigel Farage actually has quite a lot to do with that, you know, the kind of blokey, pubby image. Perhaps that is more attractive to male voters, both old and young, than it is to female voters.
I think I'd be a bit insulted if a canvasser came round, knocked on the door and said, oh, well, you're a woman, so this is my paper that I'm going to read out for women. And then just gave me all the women's policies.
Yes.
Like, I care about corporation tax too, actually. I care about whatever, net zero. Anyway,
Well, tell us what you really think, Emily. Now, on to a huge controversy overshadowing the Summer Olympics, and this is deeply serious. The Dutch Olympics Committee have defended the selection of a convicted child rapist for their beach volleyball team.
Yes, so in 2016, sportsman Steven van der Velde was sentenced to 4 years in prison after he admitted to raping a 12-year-old British girl.
Well, let's hear more on this story from the chief sports writer for the Daily Telegraph, Oliver Brown. Oliver, this is a shocking story, really. It's hard to see how this is going ahead. Of course, Steven van der Velde has served time in prison. He has been released, but still a shocking selection from the Dutch Olympic Committee.
Yeah, it is an extraordinary story. The Dutch have allowed Steven van der Velde to rehabilitate his Olympic career. As far as they're concerned, the conviction is spent, and he is, in the eyes of the law, he is free to pursue whatever avenue he chooses. Where this becomes difficult is in the fact that in the original court case, the judge declared that his Olympic ambitions were a shattered dream. Even his own defense lawyer said, the headlines say it all, sex monster. This plainly is a career's end. And yet now, 8 years on, he's not only achieved remarkable results as a volleyballer, but he has, with his playing partner, he's beaten the #1 ranked side and is now selected for the Paris Olympics. And actually, far from acknowledging the problems with this, the Dutch have doubled down and said, we fully support his involvement. He has sought the requisite counselling. He's a changed man. He's married and a father. And that's the end of it as far as they're concerned. But I very much doubt it's the end of the issue in a wider sense.
No, and how are the Dutch reacting to this? Has this been made a lot of in the press? Are there, women's groups or the government getting involved with this?
No, actually, an editorial in The Telegraph, their biggest and most influential newspaper, expressed bemusement as to why this was becoming an issue again. He gave an interview in 2018 with Dutch television, acknowledging it was the biggest mistake of his life. But he also gave another interview which indicated a distinct lack of remorse on his part, saying that it was unfair for him to be branded as a paedophile. And the NSPCC reacted very strongly against that, showing that they said this showed that he was not contrite, that he was not remorseful, and that therefore he had no place as a prospective Olympian. And it's a side of the argument that should be taken into account.
Do the Dutch have a different view on rehabilitation than the British in general? I mean, I suppose perhaps I'm taking a wild stab in the dark here, but I suppose the median British opinion is that, my goodness me, this person committed a monstrous act. He's unlikely to be able to be reformed. Is there perhaps a different sentimentality in the Netherlands, or is it simply that he's a very good sports person, and therefore they're putting concerns and qualms aside in the hope of a medal?
Yeah, I think it would be difficult to support the second thesis, in that they do seem very aware of the moral conundrum. But the reactions I've seen from Holland acknowledge that there is a different sensibility around these things. I mean, he was allowed... The Dutch extradited him to face trial in the UK, but as a condition of that, he served part of his prison sentence in Holland. And he didn't serve the 4 years that he was sentenced to. In fact, he only served 12 months. And
12 months for raping a child?
12 months. Yeah.
That is quite incredible. I was just sorry, just to add to that, the Dutch Olympic Committee is saying that oh, essentially it's OK, he's shown self-insight and reflection.
They say that he's been on a very closely supervised rehabilitation path. They say that this has involved various counselling sessions. This has involved him acknowledging, the extreme error of his ways. And as far as they're concerned, he is reintegrated into elite sport and reintegrated into the Olympic Games. Now, one argument that I find quite compelling is that yes, he on certain levels he has served his time. There is an element of rehabilitation that should be considered, but you do wonder if the Olympic Games, given the gravity of what he's done, should be something that's out of reach. And if you look at the declaration that Olympians in Paris will have to sign, Article 7 says you must be a role model. And Van der Velde seems to fall very far from most definitions of a role model.
Well, that's a very interesting point, compelling point, yes, indeed. Thank you so much for talking us through that story. Oliver Brown, chief sports writer at the Daily Telegraph. Great to have you on. Gosh, you would have thought, yes, not competing in the Olympics would be part of a penalty of such a hideous crime anyway.
Yeah. Well, goodness me. Time to debrief from that. Plenty more coming up on the show today. Junior doctors have commenced in their 5-day strike in an ongoing dispute over pay. We'll bring you the very latest after your headlines with Tatiana.
Good afternoon. The top stories. The number of Metropolitan Police officers under investigation over bets on the timing of the general election has risen to at least 7. The force says one, a protection officer assigned to the Prime Minister, was arrested last week on suspicion of misconduct in public office. He's been bailed and is subject to restricted duties. A further 6 officers have been identified as having placed bets on the timing of the election. The Met says the Gambling Commission continues to investigate those cases, but the Met's Directorate of Professional Standards is being kept informed. At least 5 Conservatives are being investigated by the Gambling Commission as part of its inquiry into bets. Labour has also been dragged into the row, suspending one candidate after he was investigated by the regulator for betting on himself to lose his seat. Sir Keir Starmer says the Labour government would work with whoever is in power in France on tackling migrant channel crossings. In a TV debate last night, Sir Keir accused the Prime Minister of being bullied into taking action into the betting scandal, while Mr Sunak repeatedly warned voters not to surrender to Labour's tax and migration plans. Sir Keir Starmer has told GB News today that the issue of channel migrants is much more than just a border issue.
Record numbers of people are coming here in small boats. He's lost control of our borders, literally lost control, not only of the numbers that are coming, but also who's coming. And so this is not just a border issue, it's a national security issue. The deterrent is smashing the gangs that are running this vile trade so that nobody gets into a boat to cross the channel. The Prime Minister is simply interested in a gimmick, the Rwanda scheme, for people who've already arrived here, a few hundred people.
Junior doctors in England are striking for an 11th time in almost a year. Medics are warning that more strike action could take place in the summer if the next government doesn't move negotiations forward in a timely manner. Junior doctors are walking out for 5 days this time in their long-running dispute over pay. They want a 35% pay increase. And the mother of a British teenager who went missing in Tenerife says some of the money raised by a crowdfunding appeal will be withdrawn to help with the search for her son. The appeal has so far raised more than £36,000. Debbie Duncan has thanked the public for their support, kind messages and good wishes. Jay's now been missing for 11 days. Yesterday, Spanish police searched a mountainous area by helicopter, with sniffer dogs also being used on the ground. He had gone on holiday for the first time without his parents. And those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I am Tatiana Sanchez. More in half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Cheers Britannia Wine Club proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2646 and 1.1820 euros. The price of gold is £1,833.54 per ounce, and the FTSE 100 is at 8,207 points.
Cheers Britannia Wine Club proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Hi there, welcome along to the latest forecast from the Met Office for GB News. It's very warm in the southeast this afternoon, but it is turning much cooler during the next day or so across the whole of the UK as this unseasonably deep low moves into the northwest, and that's going to bring some increasingly strong winds, gusts into the 40s miles an hour across western Scotland and Northern Ireland. Could cause some ferry disruption, some bridge closures, and it's also going to make it feel unpleasant with spiralling bands of rain reaching western Scotland and Northern Ireland, showers for northern England, parts of Wales and the southwest with a lot of cloud here and much cooler, but we keep the warmth in the southeast at least for the first few hours of the afternoon. Temperatures into the high 20s once again. Before that, cooler air sweeps across the whole of the UK, and it's certainly going to feel cool with some heavy rain clearing Shetland during the afternoon and some also persistent wet weather pushing into western Scotland, Northern Ireland, the winds staying brisk. And we've got one or two showers into Wales and the southwest. A lot of cloud here compared with recent days, but it stays clear across East Anglia and the southeast during the evening. And overnight we keep the clear spells here whilst bands of rain and showers push through Scotland, Northern England, North Wales and Northern Ireland. So a north-south contrast overnight. The winds staying strong across the country, but temperatures lower compared with recent nights, so perhaps more comfortable for sleeping in those areas where we've had the muggy air persisting. In the south, it's a fine start to Friday, some sunshine first thing, and it stays mostly dry, albeit rather cloudy, cool and breezy. Further north, we've got lots of showers pushing into North Wales, Northern England, Scotland and Northern Ireland. Some heavy downpours, but the rain less persistent. Nevertheless, it's going to stay cool in the north, temperatures close to average in the south.
The latest GB News travel.
Hello, good afternoon to you. I'm Jules Buckley. The southbound M6 slow going around Lancaster Junction 34 down to Junction 33 towards the A6 turn-off. A collision there means a lane is coned off. Staying in the county, the northbound A585 between St George's Park and Wheaton Road in Wesham is currently closed for a spillage. Now the southbound M42 remains closed off. Junction 10 down to 9 out of action. That's Tamworth down towards Coles Hill. Queuing on the surrounding routes. Emergency resurfacing repairs there continue. Now the northbound M1, the entry slips part block coming on at junction 21 for Leicester. There's a breakdown causing delays, and the southbound A12 in Essex still slow going away from the Crown interchange at junction 29. That follows an earlier collision, but all the lanes now are back open, and that's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 39 minutes past 1. Now, junior doctors have commenced an extraordinary 5-day strike in their ongoing dispute over pay.
Yes, so the BMA announced the walkout last month. They're demanding a 35% pay rise to make up for what they say are 15 years of below-inflation rises.
Well, it's the 11th such strike since March 2023, and despite back-and-forth negotiations with the government.
Yes, well, let's find out more from health writer and commentator Roy Lilly. Roy, thank you very much indeed for your time. Is this all a bit pointless, really, during an election campaign? No minister can sit down and negotiate and change the terms of their contract?
No, it's totally a complete waste of time as far as the negotiations of the strike are concerned, because, as you say, I mean, if the Tories sat down and tried to do a deal with the strikers now, they'd say, well, you're not going to be elected anyway, so there's no point in talking to you. And Labour's not in power, so there's no point in talking to them. And it's more than that. I mean, a 5-day strike will cause real havoc in the NHS. It's not just the days during the strike. the way these strikes are managed, and the NHS is getting quite good at them, but the way they're managed is to make sure that they have almost no one on the hospital wards during the strike period. So most of the elective procedures that require a period of inpatient care, they put the brakes on a fortnight before the strike starts to make absolutely sure that there's no one in hospital that will need medical doctor care. So if you can imagine that for 5 days, the number of people that would involve over the 5 days. And then, of course, during the strike, everything is done to avoid admitting. And then after the strike, this is where the chaos begins, because the GPs get inundated with phone calls from people who say, look, you know, my elective hip or my hip operation, my knee operation has been cancelled. Do you know when I'm going to get back on the list? And I was speaking to a GP practice just the other day, and they told me 75% of their telephone traffic after a strike is from people ringing up saying, do you know when I'm going to get my appointment? It causes chaos in primary care. It causes chaos in the hospitals because, again, people ring up, rightly so. I mean, understandably, they want to know when they're going to be reinstated, because a lot of people, I mean, it's not just a case of someone going into hospital and being fixed up and coming home. A lot of them are older people, elective procedures, I mean, knees, hips, that kind of thing. And so they have daughters and sons that take time off work and take annual leave so they can be with their mum or their dad when they have the operation post-operative. So, I mean, this causes chaos for the hospitals. It causes a huge amount of worry for the patients and for their families. So it's a nightmare scenario. For what purpose? And it makes you wonder, what is it that a doctor, people that we kind of look to for some sort of ethical standing in society, what on earth does a doctor think they're going to achieve by going on strike at the moment? I mean, I kind of get going on strike normally, but there's no point now. And in any event, the junior doctors' strike mandate doesn't expire until September. So they could easily plan a strike after the election if they weren't getting what they wanted. And there's no point whatever in doing it now other than to cause disruption and heartache. And I think it's a wretched, callous thing to do.
It is astonishing and callous. I think you've put the nail on it, because I mean, my God, this is an extraordinary moment when not only would it be fruitless to negotiate with a government that is likely leaving office in 7 days' time, but also it would be illegal for that government to enter into formal negotiations changing the policy during the defined election period. It just is astonishing, especially given that consultants have settled, nurses have settled, everyone in the Agenda for Change NHS groupings have settled. It's only the junior doctors who are holding out here. I mean, it starts to look nakedly political.
Yes, I think so. I mean, they've had 9%, and there was an extra 3% on the table last time they were talking. And I mean, they say the government walked away. The government say they walked away. I mean, whatever it is, it never came to anything. And I mean, and on the sort of political front, I think Keir Starmer here has missed a trick, because it's a dot on the card, isn't it, that they're going to form the next election. What he could have done in the last few weeks was to have some private conversations with the junior doctors, done a deal with them for pay restitution, say, over the life of a parliament, over 5 years. They could probably do something, shake hands on a deal, and then announce, I've done the deal, don't I look like a prime minister? Yeah. So, I mean, they've missed that trick, I think.
I mean, Roy, what do you make of the argument that we often hear from BMA members that the NHS is in such a state that people are already dying on waiting lists, people are already having operations delayed, people are already not being able to have appointments in a timely fashion, and that this strike action is in order to save the NHS?
Well, look, I mean, I think everybody realises the NHS has been through hell and back. I mean, it had 10 years of flatline funding after the world banking crisis. We rolled straight into COVID. Then there was the disruption of Brexit, where we lost 20,000 nurses, that they went home. And I mean, certainly the NHS has gone through a very difficult time, and it's funding now. I mean, it's the next 3 years, there's only a 1% uplift, and it needs 4% to keep its head above water. So, I mean, it's right to say that. But to imply that, there are so many people waiting, a few more won't matter whilst we go on strike, I just think that's horribly arrogant, and I don't buy into that at all. And it is right for the junior doctors to say that their pay parity has fallen behind, no question about it. But whose fault is that? What have the BMA been doing for the last 15 years? They've been asleep at the wheel. They've let this happen. It's true that exploitative governments have said, well, look, if they're not going to push us for more money, we're not going to give it to them. A doctor's a doctor. Where else are they going to work? And so, I understand the exploitative government argument, but where have the BMA been? I would have thought if I was a junior doctor, my fight would be with the BMA, not with the government, the BMA for letting it get this bad.
And yet, if you're a junior doctor, you know that in a few years' time you'll be a consultant and you'll be on six figures. Ultimately, it's sort of you get pay progression throughout your career, if not through the specific job that you're in right now. I'm afraid we've run out of time, but Roy Lilly, really fascinating to talk to you and get your expertise. Thank you very much indeed for coming on.
Yes, but coming up, we're going to be speaking to the Shadow Secretary of State for Science, Innovation and Technology. Don't go anywhere.
Britain's Newsroom, weekday mornings from 9:30.
I've got a grade 3 astrocytoma brain tumour. Once I was diagnosed, I tried to do my claim with my insurance company and was rejected. They then also cancelled my life insurance and also cancelled my wife's policies as well.
And this is Zurich Insurance, John.
This is Zurich,
and their point was, because you'd had some dizzy spells, which you hadn't told them about, they say dizzy spells equates to brain tumour, which there's no evidence to support that.
I was with King's College Hospital. They ignored them. King's College Hospital were the experts.
And you were expecting £25,000?
Yeah, that was a critical illness claim.
Critical illness, because you've got a critical illness. Clearly, it couldn't be more critical, could it?
No.
Michelle, you've got a lovely poorly husband, and you're also worrying about paying the bills and what the future holds.
Yeah.
What impact is this having on you on a day-to-day basis?
I try not to think too much about the future because it does upset me. I'm kind of thinking, when John does go, I'm left with a mortgage to pay and 2 young children.
How old are your kids?
5 and 3.
Right.
Yeah. So it's incredibly tough.
And are you working?
I haven't worked since having the children.
Right.
And that's a decision we made when we had children.
In the grand scheme of things, this amount of money is a drop in the ocean for a company like Zurich.
Yeah, because I think they could make all this go away.
I've read some of the statement. Zurich said, "We're sorry to hear of the very difficult circumstances Mr. Renlin's family are experiencing." You're terminally ill, and they're calling that difficult circumstances.
The People's Channel.
This is GB News, and we are Britain's election channel.
This vote may seem to be about the politicians in the media, but it's actually about you.
And we won't ever forget that. Join us up and down the country as we follow every moment together.
Now more than ever, it's important to hear
all sides as you make your decision ahead of polling day.
We're here for you.
This is GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's election channel.
On election night, we are throwing a party.
The GB News Election Night Watch Party will be live from Essex, and you are all invited.
On air from 10 o'clock, we'll have familiar faces from across the channel, entertainment and lots more stuff as we keep our eye on all the results as they come flying in.
If you want to join our live Election Night Watch Party audience, scan the QR code on screen or go to gbnews.com/election party.
Right, it is 1:50 in the afternoon, and let's get back to the final week of general election campaigning and speak to Shadow Secretary of State for Science, Innovation and Technology, Peter Kyle. Peter Kyle, thank you very much indeed for joining us this splendid afternoon. If the polls are to be believed, the Labour Party are heading for a super majority in the House of Commons at the election next week. Why did Keir Starmer only score a draw with Rishi Sunak last night?
Well, firstly, the polls are not to be believed. There are still millions of people out there who have not made up their minds. I've been right around the country in this campaign, and I know there's a lot of people who are looking very closely at the Labour Party and others and still to make their mind up, so we are not taking anything for granted. Secondly, on the debate last night, what we saw was a desperate and at times hysterical Prime Minister badgering Keir, who was acting like the Prime Minister that the country wants for our country. I mean, you had Rishi Sunak acting like an opposition leader, and you had Keir Starmer, who was acting with dignity, talking about the future. I mean, Rishi Sunak did nothing about than just attack Labour, whereas Keir was there talking about policies that are going to tackle the challenges we have, create new opportunities for our country. It was rooted in the future in a really positive way, and I was proud of him for that.
Peter Kyle, it did fall apart a little bit when it came to illegal migration. Rishi Sunak certainly scored a point or two on that little discussion, did he not? Saying, essentially, pushing Keir Starmer to actually say what he's going to do with illegal migrants who are here already, with countries that we don't have returns agreements with. It all fell apart.
Well, forgive me for smiling, but what's fallen apart when it comes to small boat crossings? What's fallen apart with irregular and at times illegal migration to our country is not what Keir Starmer said. It's what this current government has done. Even after they got the Rwanda bill through, even though their own MPs voted against it, you've seen the Rwanda bill do nothing as a deterrent, which is what they said it was, because we now have record numbers of people crossing the channel. We have 63,000 people living in hotels around the country.
But is that not because the Rwanda flights haven't taken off yet?
None of them are being protested.
That's because the Rwanda flights haven't taken off yet, surely.
No, they are sitting in hotels, and the law that they've just passed on Rwanda means that the people who are currently in hotels, they're not going to be processed and they're not going to be sent to Rwanda. The government have said not say what they're going to do with it. Keir was very clear last night. We are going to start processing the backlog. We are going to set up the Border Security Command, and we're going to go and start tackling and using terror legislation against the people who are conducting the people smuggling. Bearing in mind, journalists right now in the last 24 hours have tracked down people smugglers. They've found them, had conversations with them. Why is it our government is incapable of going and finding them and locking them up? You know, why is journalists able to do stuff that this government can't? Nothing proves why
Peter,
change is so needed in our
harking back to a day when we had sovereignty and jurisdiction over the Middle East. I'm afraid those days are long gone. The British Empire has receded into the mists of time. How on earth do we have jurisdiction over countries that are run by governments with whom we do not have ordinary relations?
Well, this government told us that we would take back control of our borders. We do have control of the English Channel. And we seem incapable of actually doing a deal and cooperating with our nearest neighbours, taking control of the people smugglers that are driving people across. Well, what you're talking about there, of course, is tackling the issues at root. And, of course, I've been on your programme several times in recent years to talk exactly about this issue. Of course, the government pulled out the use of military in areas of political instability such as Yemen and others where they were delivering aid. They cut the aid budget to many of the countries that are driving migrants.
The last time your party was in office, we invaded Afghanistan. Are you suggesting that that's the solution? To take the Taliban out and...
No,
I can't see how else you prosecute, using courts, people operating in a country run by the Taliban. I mean, unless you're going to root out that government and go for regime change, how do you have this legalistic approach?
No, I'm talking about there are countries where there is political instability, where there's the need for long-term development in those countries. Of course, our government has turned its back on the kind of development work that stops people fleeing in the first place. We have stopped engaging in parts of the world that is the driving force of migration. Now, what we're talking about here is the refusal to even clear the backlog, which is their own backlog.
Yeah, it sounds like you don't know what you're going to do with those. It sounds, though, that it sounds like you don't know what you're going to do with those people who have arrived here, had their case looked at and have been denied asylum. That's the issue here. What are you going to do with those people? The government have said that they want to send them to Rwanda. What's the plan with those people?
I'm sorry, but you're factually wrong on that. When it comes to the backlog, before the legislation was passed, which is over 65,000 people, the legislation doesn't apply to them. So the government aren't going to process, they're not going to return, and they are not going to send to Rwanda. What we will do is process the entire backlog, and only then will we know where people have come from. We do not know where people have come from. We do not know what their right to remain or how many of the people we need to deport back and send back to other countries is in the first place. So until we get that first step of processing the people who are here, I mean, I don't think people realise that there are tens and tens of thousands of people claiming asylum in our country now, and the government isn't even processing them. So once we process them, we can take the steps of knowing who is here, who has the right to be here, who needs to be returned, and we can set about delivering that at that time.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Peter Carl. Great to speak to you, Shadow Secretary of State for Science, Innovation and Technology. Thank you very much.
Now, if you want to hear more from the Prime Minister ahead of next week's elections, be sure to tune in to 7 o'clock this evening on GB News, when Rishi Sunak will be sitting down with our political editor, Christopher Hope. We're looking ahead to that after this short break. To repeat, 7 o'clock this evening, GB News.
Place to be.
Absolutely. Rishi Sunak speaking to our political editor.
It's the final week to see how you can win big this summer. First, there's a totally tax-free £15,000 in cash to make your summer spectacular. Spend that extra cash however you like. You'll also win a brand new iPhone, Apple AirPods, and if that wasn't enough, a £500 voucher to spend at your favourite UK attraction. You have to hurry, as lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday. For another chance to win the iPhone, treats, and £15,000 cash, text prize to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. You can also enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries cost £2, or post your name and number to GB06 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Congratulations to the GB News winners at this year's Trick Awards.
And the winner of Interview of the Year is... Alistair Stewart reveals his heartbreaking diagnosis to Camilla Tormini.
And the winner is GB News Breakfast. And the winner is Nigel Farage.
And thank you to you, our GB News viewers and listeners, for making us the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Jubes Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the arguments. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry. Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
This is GB News, and we are Britain's election channel.
This vote may seem to be about the politicians in the media, but actually, it's about you.
And we won't forget that.
Join us up and down the country as we follow every moment together.
More than ever, it's important to hear
all sides
as you make your decision ahead of polling day.
We're here for you.
This is GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's election channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 2 o'clock on Thursday, the 27th of June. I'm Tom Harwood.
And I'm Emily Carver.
The final fiery face-off. Starmer and Sunak were put on the spot over the gambling scandal rocking the campaign. Onlookers claim the PM came out on top, but we want to know, who do you think won? That's the debate we'll be having this hour.
And we'll be heading stateside to look ahead to the battle for the White House. Donald Trump is facing off against Joe Biden tonight. We'll be telling you everything you need to know before tonight's presidential showdown.
And Reform have rallied in County Durham, with Nigel Farage reassuring voters he is the candidate connecting with the younger generation. But we'll be asking the question, is he right? Now, there have been a number of polls conducted about the debate that happened last night. The first snap verdict from YouGov was 50-50.
Yeah.
A completely divided audience of those who watched, half for the Prime Minister, half for the Leader of the Opposition. But crucially, amongst 2019 Conservative voters, now, that was the cohort of voters that delivered an 80-seat majority for Boris Johnson. Amongst that cohort, Rishi Sunak won by over 80%.
So he'll be hoping he can convert that into some more votes. But have people already made up their mind? Of course, lots of people will have already put their little letter, their ballot into the post box, and it will already be there.
Yes, it was interesting speaking to Peter Kyle just now, the Shadow Cabinet Minister, who was saying that he didn't believe the polls, that, lots of people haven't made up their minds. He was almost sort of trying to downplay the chances of the Labour Party winning a supermajority, which perhaps suggests, if you're going to look at that through a cynical eye, that the Labour Party are a little bit worried that voters don't want a supermajority Labour government, don't want a very unbalanced House of Commons.
Nah, it's just classic reverse psychology. It's just classic reverse psychology. No, we're not going to win. Oh, well, then I have to put my vote in if I wasn't planning to.
Yes.
You know, they're just trying to downplay the win, aren't they?
Votes.
Turn out that you can't just sit on your hands. You can't think this is a sure thing. You've got to come out and vote for us, I think is what they're trying to say. Although he went further than I think I've heard from some shadow ministers.
But it's a complete nonsense, of course. It's a complete fiction to say the polls are wrong because there are undecided voters. Because what do you think the polls do with the undecided voters? Well, many of them take them out and then you're just left. That's an assumption being made about those undecideds. But there are other polls that actually redistribute the undecided voters based on past voting intentions. Now, some of these polls, I think it's more in common, off the top of my head, that does this most favourably towards the Conservatives, says that most of these undecideds will break Conservative. Well, even if you do that, even if you redistribute the undecideds to going and saying, oh, they'll actually vote Conservative on the day, the Labour Party still wins a supermajority.
Well, we shall see. gbnews.com/your say. Get your thoughts in, but it's your headlines with Tatiana.
Emily, thank you and good afternoon. 3 minutes past 2, the top stories. The number of Metropolitan Police officers under investigation over bets on the timing of the general election has risen to at least 7. The force says one, a protection officer assigned to the Prime Minister, was arrested last week on suspicion of misconduct in public office. He's been bailed and is subject to restricted duties. A further 6 officers have been identified as having placed bets on the timing of the election. The Met says the Gambling Commission continues to investigate those cases, but the Met's Directorate of Professional Standards is being kept informed. At least 5 Conservatives are being investigated by the Gambling Commission as part of its inquiry into bets. Labour has also been dragged into the row, suspending one candidate after he was investigated by the regulator for betting on himself to lose his seat. Sir Keir Starmer says a Labour government would work with whoever's in power in France on tackling migrant channel crossings. The Labour leader and Rishi Sunak have returned to the campaign trail today after they clashed over illegal immigration and the betting row in a TV debate last night. Sir Keir accused the Prime Minister of being bullied into taking action in the betting scandal, while Mr Sunak repeatedly warned voters not to surrender to Labour's tax and migration plans. The Prime Minister says the country is in danger under a potential Labour government with a leader who he says has no plans.
Keir Starmer changes his mind on almost every major position that he has taken. Right? And times that we're living in, you need leadership which has the courage of its convictions. That's what I have. You have to ask yourself, why is he not telling you his plan for the country, what he wants to do? Because he probably doesn't think you're going to like it when you hear it. Right? We know, as you saw last night, those of you that were watching the debate, absolutely no answers about how to tackle immigration. Right? I've got a plan, we're bringing immigration down, we've got a plan to stop the boats. He would make us the soft touch of Europe when it comes to that issue.
Sir Keir Starmer has told GB News today that the issue of illegal migration is much more than just a border issue.
Record numbers of people are coming here in small boats. He's lost control of our borders, literally lost control, not only of the numbers that are coming, but also who's coming. And so this is not just a border issue, it's a national security issue. The deterrent is smashing the gangs that are running this vile trade so that nobody gets into a boat to cross the channel. The Prime Minister is simply interested in a gimmick, the Rwanda scheme, for people who've already arrived here, a few hundred people.
Lib Dem leader Sir Ed Davies says the winner of the general election should pass an emergency budget to fix the healthcare system. The party says its manifesto pledges a £9.4 billion spending package for the NHS, healthcare and social care. Sir Ed Davies says he wants to see a budget which would be much more targeted in scope than a normal one.
Everyone knows that they're having problems getting a GP, the care system's in a mess, social care's not there for so many people. We have to start straight away. It's why the Liberal Democrats put it right at the centre of our manifesto and why we're calling today for an emergency health and care budget.
Junior doctors in England are walking off the job for an 11th time in almost a year. Medics are warning that more strike action could take place in the summer if the next government doesn't move forward negotiations in a timely manner. Medics are walking out for 5 days in their long-running dispute over pay. Junior doctors want a 35% pay increase. The British Medical Association has said it's ready to talk, and the union has already had some discussions with the Labour Party. The BMA insists their junior members are historically underpaid.
Our pay at the moment for a doctor in their first year is £15.50. We're asking for that to be £21. £21 an hour for a doctor that's starting life-saving treatment on our loved ones, £21 an hour for a doctor with student loans of £100,000. And because the pay cut has been so strong, we're losing doctors. We don't have enough. And when we don't have enough doctors, we're seeing patients die needlessly in the NHS every single week.
The mother of a British teenager who went missing in Tenerife says some of the money raised by a crowdfunding appeal will be withdrawn to help with the search for her son. The appeal has so far raised more than £36,000. Debbie Duncan has thanked the public for their support, kind messages and good wishes. Jay has now been missing for 11 days. Yesterday, Spanish police searched a mountainous area by helicopter, with sniffer dogs also being used on the ground. He'd gone on holiday for the first time without his parents. And England's football squad has been training for their first knockout game against Slovakia at the Euros. The Three Lions topped their group before getting into the knockout stages of the competition, but they will be without their midfielder Phil Foden, who had to leave the training camp and return back to the UK for the birth of his third child. It is still hoped Foden will be back with the team by Sunday, though. That's the day of England's last 16 match. And those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I am Tatiana Sanchez. More in half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 8 minutes past 2. Now, yesterday evening, Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer took part in their final televised debate before voters head to the polls next week.
And there were fiery clashes, including on illegal immigration, tax and also net zero, with the pair even being asked if they were really the best candidates the UK had to offer.
Well, meanwhile, Nigel Farage has declared that there is very little difference between the Conservatives and Labour during a campaign rally held this afternoon in County Durham, reiterating his claim that this is the immigration election.
But who won last night? Of course, it was only Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak head-to-head. We're going to now be joined by Chief Political Commentator at The Independent, John Rentoul, and the political commentator, Reem Ibrahim. Ladies first, Reem, who won?
So I actually think that Rishi Sunak performed immeasurably better than Keir Starmer. And I think what's really interesting about both of their performances is that there seems to be this kind of courtroom element of Keir Starmer, the fact that he's a solicitor, that he's very, very good at sort of looking at the details of those arguments. But again, they tend to be written. Actually, when it comes to the political realm and being able to communicate those ideas politically in a head-to-head debate, he seems to be lacking in those kind of skills.
Well, John, what do you make of that?
Well, I think it's true that Rishi Sunak was much more animated than he had been previously. He was very lively, a sort of yapping attack dog. But I thought that allowed Keir Starmer to sit back and play defensive and to present himself as, in effect, the Prime Minister already. I mean, I think because everybody thinks that Labour's going to win this election, all the problems that came up in questions from the audience are problems for Keir Starmer. They're not really problems for Rishi Sunak. It's just Rishi Sunak was just point scoring. Whereas I think Keir Starmer came across, not as articulate as Rishi Sunak, but as extremely solid. And actually, if you look at the instant polls, one of them was a tie, but the other one gave it to Starmer.
But only by an edge. And given that Starmer's expected to win a supermajority, perhaps he's not winning by as much as you'd expect. But John, just to stay with you for a second, is this not encapsulating the entire Labour campaign? Standing back, not saying very much, and just letting everyone else, whether it's the SNP in Scotland or the Conservatives in England, almost sort of take each other out.
It's brilliant, isn't it? It's defensive politics. It's jiu-jitsu. You just let your opponent destroy yourself and you don't interrupt them while they're doing it. It's not very satisfying from the point of view of many Labour supporters, I suspect, because Keir Starmer was definitely not promising anything. I mean, he was very much like a Prime Minister explaining to an irresponsible leader of the opposition why you couldn't do all sorts of things and why you couldn't spend money that isn't there. I mean, Liz Truss was very much a feature of the debate on both sides.
OK, well, Reem, what do you have to say to that? Was Rishi Sunak just point scoring?
No, I don't think so. I think what's really interesting about what was just said in terms of the conversation about Liz Truss and the fact that Sunak supported her, I think that sort of came back to Sunak and the fact that Keir Starmer supported Jeremy Corbyn and stood on Jeremy Corbyn's manifesto in 2019. I think that what's interesting about that is there seems to be a bit of a double standard in the way in which history looks at both of those party leaders. I think what is interesting as well, just going back to what Sunak actually said in terms of the substance at the debate last night, he spoke about things like the cost of net zero, the fact that immigration is far too high, and also the other aspects of that in terms of the way in which the tax burden is too high. Now, of course, we have a track record from Rishi Sunak. We know what he's like in number 10. We don't know what Starmer would be like in number 10, and we don't know if those things would actually occur. What's really interesting from the manifestos, though, is that across all party manifestos, there are 361 policies that would increase the regulatory burden. So Sunak at the debate last night spoke about the fact that the cost of net zero, the cost of decarbonising would cost billions for the economy. But actually, across all manifestos, there seems to be a lack of real substantial policy initiatives to actually affect those changes.
Interesting, Reem, because it's something that hasn't really come up in the course of this general election. It's very easy for a politician to say, we're not going to tax you to do this. I've had this conversation with Ed Davey, the leader of the Liberal Democrats, about sewage, and he says, oh, no, this won't cost the taxpayer. We're just going to tell the water companies to not dump sewage. Well, a regulation like that is telling them to spend lots of money. They'll then have to raise people's bills to find that money. I mean, in a way, this is what you're describing, is it not? This is a tax.
Yeah, it is. And what's really interesting about the fact that we tend to think about party manifestos as being costed. Both Sunak and Keir Starmer will claim that their manifestos are costed, but they haven't taken into account the cost of regulations. And the fact that across all manifestos, there are 361 policies that would increase the regulatory burden. And again, we think about the consequences of that. That's increased costs for businesses, which therefore then automatically ends up being an increased cost for consumers. We're thinking about the fact that this will effectively restrict economic growth and, again, include those kind of stagnant wages, different consequences that will occur as a result. So we tend to think about regulation as a barrier to entry, and these ideas don't tend to be spoken about. And I think what's interesting is that last night at the election debate, these kind of substantial policy initiatives aren't being spoken about. Instead, there seems to be a lot more political point scoring.
Yes, well, that's what it comes down to in these relatively short televised debates. But John Rentoul, Keir Starmer did come a little unstuck when it came to illegal migration. Surely that was a win for Rishi Sunak. He had him in the corner.
No, I don't think he did, because immigration's gone up under Rishi Sunak as Prime Minister, and illegal immigration has gone up too. I mean, the small boats, Rishi Sunak said he was going to stop. He's failed to do that, which means
but
that...
John, sorry to interrupt. On those 2 points, legal migration is down 30% in terms of the visas issued this year, expected to halve this year. And on small boats, we heard an interesting new statistic from Rishi Sunak, saying over the last 12 months, there were fewer than the previous 12 months. That's not the traditional way we measure years, but it is, I've checked, that is literally true.
No, but that's just mucking about with statistics, isn't it? I mean, that's just selective statistics at their finest, most misleading. I mean, the point is, yes, the small boats traffic went down a bit last year, but it's gone back up again. I mean, if you're comparing like with like,
it goes back in the summer months. It goes back up in the summer months, and that's pretty much well known. But that's because of the weather. You can't. I mean, I think what Tom has said is that over the last 12 months, it has gone down in comparison to the previous 12 months. That is an improvement in the number of illegal crossings.
But towards the end of that period, it's gone up again.
It's because you don't measure July, August, September, October, which were particularly high 2 years ago, less high last year, and will probably be more high this year. It's a very, very clever way of measuring the months to make it sound like it's lower now.
But I think the point of the debate, John, was that it was one plan versus another plan. And it appeared to some viewers that Keir Starmer wasn't quite sure about what his plan was for people who have arrived illegally here and don't have their asylum claim legitimised, don't have it stamped. He didn't seem to know what he was going to do with those people.
No, that is absolutely true. But it is one plan that won't work, which is called Rwanda, against no plan. And given that at that point, Keir Starmer could retreat into the comforts of opposition and not being responsible for what's happened recently, I think he was able to defend his position reasonably well.
But things might turn around if he gets into office in a week's time. I'm sorry, that's all we've got time for, but Reem and John, really appreciate your time. Thank you very much for talking through what was a pretty profound moment in the final 6 campaigning days of this general election.
A profound moment.
A profound moment.
Well, other profound moments. Prince Harry, he's been opening up about the death of his mother, Princess Diana, while speaking to the founder of Armed Forces charity, Scotty's Little Soldiers.
Well, the Duke of Sussex joined 50 children who were being supported by the charity and urged youngsters to open up about their grief, saying, if you suppress it forever, it will eat you away inside.
Well, let's speak to our royal correspondent, Cameron Walker, who joins us in the studio. Cameron, Prince Harry has spoken quite a lot about grief and bereavement from his mother's passing and the trauma he had. Did he say anything new that we haven't heard before?
Well, I think what was interesting with this discussion that he had with the founder of charity Scotty's Little Soldiers, Nikki Scott, who set up the charity because her husband was killed in Afghanistan in 2009. He was serving in the British Armed Forces. And it was from her experience having to break the news to her then 5-year-old son, Kai, and 9-month-old daughter, Brooke, who clearly at the time didn't really remember. But the point being, she had to break the news that their father had been killed in action. And the lack of support at the time for children who were suffering from bereavements because their parents had been killed in conflict. So that's why she set up the charity. Prince Harry, of course, served 2 tours of Afghanistan himself, and he's a global ambassador for the charity. And the difference here was, instead of kind of talking about himself, which clearly we've heard a lot of in the last 3 years from Prince Harry with his memoir Spare and the Netflix series, I could go on, he was putting the spotlight back on the charity and on Nicky and her story. So it was almost like having the old Prince Harry back, and also thinking about like what could have been if he didn't step back as a working member of the royal family, and the good and the spotlight he could continue to do. So it's kind of getting him back a bit.
That's so fascinating. In many ways, he was sort of stepping into his old role in this. It was sort of performing a duty that he would have done back before the days of Megxit.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm not sure if we've got a video. We might do of Prince Harry talking to Nicky there. We don't. OK, no problem. But of course, it is kind of like before the days of Megxit. He's been heavily involved in the charity for a good decade now. But when he came back for the Invictus Games celebration commemorations of the 10 years of Invictus last month, he spent time with 50 or so children, as you said in your link there, who are benefiting from Scottish Little Soldiers. Hundreds of children have benefited. It gives them bereavement support, respite breaks for families as well, and kind of helps them with their grief. But he did talk briefly about his own experience about losing his mother, Princess Diana, and he talks about how a first instinct of a child when they lose a parent in awful circumstances such as that is, I have to be really sad for the rest of my life. And he talks about how those children who've lost parents through conflict feel like that, and how actually it's OK to be happy again later on in life when you've had the support, and realising that the parent you've lost would want you to be happy later on. So that's the message Prince Harry was trying to get across here. OK, and Prince William, his brother, what's he been up to? Yeah, so he is across in London today at an Earthshot Prize Stories of Impacts event, and he's been talking quite candidly. Have we got a video for this? I was told we did. Probably not. We do. We do. Let's listen to Prince William then. No, we don't. No, we don't. OK, sorry about that. So Prince William has been speaking about the Stories of Impact event, his Earthshot Prize set up to find solutions to repair the planet over the next decade. It's been running for 4 years now. This is kind of a halfway mark before the 5th anniversary of the prize. And he's been talking about the different impacts, different companies that have been set up to find solutions to repair the planet and the impact it's had. So he's been talking candidly about that and why we should be optimistic rather than pessimistic about the planet. I think he's getting frustrated about the doom and gloom scaremongering that we've had.
Everything's going to be on fire and there's no way to save apart from everyone going back to living in caves and eating moss and all the rest of it. No, it's fascinating. I've been reading a lot about the advancing in solar power right now, which actually is going to be so useful for the parts of the world that get particularly hotter, because it fits so well with air conditioning. I mean, it's basically free aircon through your solar panels. But Cameron, one final thing, which is, because we've seen some senior royals step back, 3 senior royals, 1 in hospital, 2 regularly visiting for treatment, of course. Do you think that's encouraged Prince Harry to take on that perhaps more responsible role that you were talking about?
Well, I think over the last few years, it's been pretty clear that Prince Harry's been pretty angry and frustrated with the situation he's ended up being in. And there's been long periods of absence, I think, from Prince Harry and indeed Meghan Markle. And this appears for him perhaps carving out his role again, what he enjoys, what his passion is, and I think that is clearly military engagements and military, and highlighting military causes, and that's what I think what we're seeing from Prince Harry. I don't think it's to do with we're losing members of the royal family temporarily, such as the Princess of Wales, Princess Anne. I think he's trying to go it alone. I don't think this is him trying to become a working member of the royal family again. I think he is pretty happy in California from the messages we're kind of getting from him. But clearly it is a huge frustration, I think, perhaps for those royal watchers and those royal fans who think what could have been if he stayed as a working member, and how much he could have perhaps helped, and indeed Meghan, if she stayed as a working member of the royal family in this situation where the slimmed down monarchy looking very slim indeed.
Well, Cameron Walker, thank you so much for bringing us all of that in our royal roundup.
Yes, and coming up, a huge night in the United States as Joe Biden takes on Donald Trump in their very first debate of the election. Next.
Patrick Christie's Tonight, weekdays from 9 p.m.
The mystery surrounding the disappearance of flight MH370 has perplexed the planet now for 10 years. But now all of a sudden researchers at Cardiff University have piped up and said, oh, we heard a beep. Aerospace engineer, founder of MA370search.com, is Richard Godfrey. Richard, are we going to find this thing?
The new research is much more thorough and gone in much more detail. It is picking up acoustic waves under the water. It's not conclusive, but it's a good step forward.
Is this a cover-up job of epic proportions? Do you think something quite sinister happened to this plane? Because it is all very odd.
I think you're right. It is all very odd. It is. We have a lot of data, but we don't have the final analysis, and we won't until we actually find the wreckage. The Indian Ocean is a huge place, 77 million square kilometers. When we find the plane, we can recover the flight data recorder, the cockpit voice recorder. We can learn a lot more.
Do you think someone might have shot it down?
No, the plane flew until it ran out of fuel. The plane was perfectly in working order. There was an active pilot right until the end. So my only theory at the moment is the captain of the plane actually committed a hijack of his own plane. But until we find it, we won't be able to prove that.
We are potentially a step closer now to knowing and to one of the greatest mysteries of recent times anyway, finally being solved. There's aerospace engineer there, Richard Godfrey. Thank you.
Britain's election channel, the People's Channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
GB News brings you accurate reporting of the day's topical agenda.
When the news breaks, wherever and whenever it's happening,
we'll be there.
This is GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is the nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Well, it's a huge night for American politics this evening, isn't it?
Yes, President Joe Biden will face off against Donald Trump in their first televised debate even of the election year.
Yes, the matchup will be hosted by CNN and is the first of two agreed-upon debates where the rivals will hope to prove themselves in front of a national audience.
Well, this is, of course, a profound moment in this election campaign, and much earlier than we'd normally see in the electoral cycle in the United States. Gone is the commission that was established in the years following those first debates we saw between Nixon and Kennedy, first in 1960, that really set the pace. And after that moment, we saw a commission controlled by the two major parties that set in play the theme. 3 debates were to be held, each presidential electoral cycle. This year's the first year that is not happening. Only 2 debates and many, many months before Americans go to vote in November.
Yes, it'll be interesting to see what happens and who comes out on top, whether President Joe Biden will be able to be very coherent. Of course, he's slipped up a few times, had some major gaffes recently. What will Donald Trump say? I believe we're going to speak to a spokesperson from Republicans overseas, Jennifer Ewing, who's there. Jennifer, how are people gearing up for this debate? What do you expect to see?
I can't hear you guys.
Oh, I'm so sorry, Jennifer. You know what? We're going to see if we can re-establish that. But I think it is interesting because it was Joe Biden who was pressuring fewer debates and further away from the general election. Many people thought that Donald Trump might be the person to sort of blow up the systems that had been running American politics for decades. This debate commission that had strict rules for how these debates were done so that they would be conducted fairly. But it wasn't Donald Trump who blew up that order and those systems. It was Joe Biden, which has raised some big questions, actually. Is Joe Biden expecting perhaps not to do particularly well in these debates? Is that perhaps why he wants those debates to be so far away from the actual date of the election, much further away than at any previous electoral cycle?
Well, it would be hardly surprising if that were the case. Donald Trump is very comfortable speaking to the masses, isn't he? He probably delights in the idea of a head-to-head with President Joe Biden, who has, you know, he has had some difficulties in terms of speeches. He has had some difficulties in terms of taking questions and the like. So it'll be very interesting to see how personal it gets as well. Donald Trump, we do know that sometimes he does like to turn things into a bit of a slanging match. I think that's fair to say. He likes to get the insults out. He speaks strongly. He speaks as he sees it.
Yes, Donald Trump said any time, any place, any format. And that has been what has been agreed to. Jennifer Ewing joins us once more. Jennifer, I hope that you can hear us this time. It seems you can. It is interesting that this is an atypical debate season. Not the usual 3, only 2, and both much, much earlier than we would normally expect.
No, you're right. It is much earlier. Usually you have the debates start after both conventions have taken place in July and August in this case. So they usually start around September and October. It was the Biden team that called for it earlier. There's different theories as to why that happened. I have my own. I believe this debate, it really matters. You know, a lot of the issues for both of the candidates are sort of baked in. So, for example, for Trump, people already understand his legal issues. For Biden, people already understand his cognitive issues. So what happens on this debate stage tonight matters. Now, if Biden does not perform well, that might lead his team to realize they cannot continue with him as their candidate going into November. That's one thing. However, like I said, his team is the one that called this. So they chose the network, CNN, they chose the date, and they chose the some of the rules, for example, muted mics, and for the first time ever, 2 commercial breaks.
It's a possibility then that if this doesn't go well for President Joe Biden, if he doesn't perform up to scratch, that he could actually be removed and replaced.
I mean, look, Emily, I think you and I have talked about this. I haven't, from a year ago, seen how President Biden can make it all the way to November. Now, everybody you speak to in Washington, or certainly on the Democratic side, said, no, he's our guy, we're going forward with him. But, you know, this certainly would give them an opportunity to switch him out, whether it be at the convention in August or at another time if he doesn't perform well. This debate will very much be on personalities rather than the issue sets. So if they give President Biden the cocktail of whatever he had for the State of the Union, that could help him. Or with the energy levels, but I think what needs to happen is Joe Biden needs to keep his energy levels up and not vacillate between being angry and being over animated. And President Trump needs to keep calm, you know, and in a weird way, as much as the muted mics will keep him from some of his funny one-liners and quips that, I mean, he is funny. And also there's no audience, there's no live audience, which would have helped Trump play off the audience. But maybe the mic being muted will help him from getting too aggressive and pushy how he did in 2020, which the public didn't like.
Well, it'll be fascinating watch, I'm sure, whatever happens. Jennifer Ewing, really great to speak to you. You're a spokesperson for Republicans overseas.
Fascinating.
Thanks, guys.
No live audience, 2 commercial breaks, and muted mics while the other one's speaking. I mean, this is a much more
sanitised, isn't it?
Sanitised debate.
Oh, you can't have mutes while the other's speaking. How boring, eh?
Then you'd never get the famous line, because she'd be in prison.
Anyway, coming up, the latest on the search for teenager Jay Slater. He went missing in Tenerife now 11 days ago. But first, the headlines with Tatiana.
Good afternoon. The top stories. Let's start with some breaking news this hour. One person in England has died linked to the ongoing E. coli outbreak. That's according to the UK Health Security Agency. It comes after a recent outbreak which saw 86 people admitted to hospital, according to figures released last week. A number of food manufacturers have recalled sandwiches, wraps and salads sold in major supermarkets and retail chains over fears they're linked to possible contamination. The Food Standards Agency says lettuce used in the products are thought to be the likely source of the outbreak. In other news, the number of Metropolitan Police officers under investigation over bets on the timing of the general election has risen to at least 7. The force says one, a protection officer assigned to the Prime Minister, was arrested last week on suspicion of misconduct in public office. He's now been bailed. A further 6 officers have been identified as having placed bets on the timing of the election. The Met says the Gambling Commission continues to investigate those cases, but the Met's Directorate of Professional Standards is being kept informed. At least 5 Conservatives are being investigated by the Gambling Commission as part of its inquiry into bets. Labour has also been dragged into the row, suspending one candidate after he was investigated by the regulator for betting on himself to lose his seat. Junior doctors in England are striking for an 11th time in almost a year. Medics are warning that more strike action could take place in the summer if the next government doesn't move negotiations forwards in a timely manner. Junior doctors are walking out for 5 days this time in their long-running dispute over pay. They want a 35% pay increase. And the mother of a British teenager who went missing in Tenerife says some of the money raised by a crowdfunding appeal will be withdrawn to help with the search for her son. The appeal has so far raised more than £36,000. Debbie Duncan has thanked the public for their support, kind messages and good wishes. Jay's now been missing for 11 days. Yesterday, Spanish police searched a mountainous area by helicopter, with sniffer dogs also being used on the ground. He'd gone on holiday for the first time without his parents. And those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I am Tatiana Sanchez. More in half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Hi there, welcome along to the latest forecast from the Met Office for GB News. It's very warm in the southeast this afternoon, but it is turning much cooler during the next day or so across the whole of the UK as this unseasonably deep low moves into the northwest, and that's going to bring some increasingly strong winds, gusts into the 40s miles an hour across western Scotland and Northern Ireland. Could cause some ferry disruption, some bridge closures, and it's also going to make it feel unpleasant with spiralling bands of rain reaching western Scotland and Northern Ireland, showers for northern England, parts of Wales and the southwest with a lot of cloud here and much cooler, but we keep the warmth in the southeast at least for the first few hours of the afternoon. Temperatures into the high 20s once again. Before that, cooler air sweeps across the whole of the UK, and it's certainly going to feel cool with some heavy rain clearing Shetland during the afternoon and some also persistent wet weather pushing into western Scotland, Northern Ireland, the winds staying brisk. And we've got 1 or 2 showers into Wales and the southwest. A lot of cloud here compared with recent days, but it stays clear across East Anglia and the southeast during the evening. And overnight we keep the clear spells here whilst bands of rain and showers push through Scotland, Northern England, North Wales and Northern Ireland. So a north-south contrast overnight. The winds staying strong across the country, but temperatures lower compared with recent nights, so perhaps more comfortable for sleeping in those areas where we've had the muggy air persisting. In the south, it's a fine start to Friday, some sunshine first thing, and it stays mostly dry, albeit rather cloudy, cool and breezy. Further north, we've got lots of showers pushing into North Wales, Northern England, Scotland and Northern Ireland. Some heavy downpours, but the rain less persistent. Nevertheless, it's going to stay cool in the north, temperatures close to average in the south.
The latest GB News travel. Good afternoon, I'm Jules Buckley. Argyll and Bute in Scotland. The A85 currently shut between Oban and Dumbeg. There's a police incident no way through and delays starting to build. Northbound M1 around Sheffield, junction 30 up to 31 struggling. There's a broken down vehicle blocking a lane causing delays. Surrey, the southbound M3, a lane closed on the exit slip as you come off at Lightwater and Bagshot at junction 3. Again, it's a breakdown there that's causing those hold-ups. Harrow in London, Sheepcote Road, that's the northbound A409. Now that's shut between the Northwick Park roundabout up towards Gayton Road and queuing as emergency repairs there continue. And of course, routes towards the Glastonbury Festival starting to get quite busy around Pilton, not least the A361 that's currently queuing on the westbound side. And for now, that's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Right, it is 2:40 in the afternoon. Up at 3 is Martin Dobney. Martin, what have you got coming up for us today?
Well, Rishi Sunak, we've got an exclusive kind of a sneak peek of an interview that Chris Hope did with the Prime Minister in Nottingham. He poured his heart out in a pub, done the same thing myself many times in Nottingham, and said just 150,000 votes could decide this general election. A Prime Minister who hasn't given up the ghost. He thinks it could come down to as few as votes as that. A heartfelt plea to vote Conservative. Will it work? Plus, Angela Rayner says every seat in Britain must take its fair share of asylum seekers. Labour say net zero will cost hundreds of billions of pounds. Dawn Butler saying she agrees with David Tennant on Kemi Badenoch, who should disappear. Is this a taste of a country to come under the Labour Party? Plus, junior doctor strikes. How many other unions will queue up and ask for their pound of flesh when the Labour Party get in? And Joe Biden, can he stay awake tonight during the presidential debate? Will he have a brain freeze? Will he shake hands? Will he tell Donald Trump to shut up? Of course, all eyes on this fascinating TV debate tonight, live in America.
Oh, goodness me. Well, Martin, I'm looking forward to seeing that tease of what the Prime Minister had to say. Speaking from a pub, we don't often see that from this Prime Minister, but my goodness, clearly after a certain type of voter. Martin, thank you very much.
Our teetotal Prime Minister, eh? Now, as Martin said, tonight on GB News, Rishi Sunak will sit down with our political editor, Christopher Hope. He's saying it may come down to not that many votes. Interesting to see how he works that out. It's at 7 o'clock, so don't miss it.
I can actually see what he means. But, of course, he's not talking about him winning. He's talking about whether he comes second or third.
Well, now to the latest on the search for Lancashire teenager Jay Slater, who went missing in Tenerife now 11 days ago.
Well, the mayor of a town close to where Jay disappeared claims that some locals think they saw the 19-year-old watching the Euros.
Well, Charlie Peters is in the studio for us. Take it away.
So this mayor, Emilio Jose Navarro, he said that there was CCTV footage, very grainy image, showing Jay Slater about 10 hours after his phone last pinged on the 17th of June, last Monday. So in the late afternoon in Tenerife, showing him watching the Euros. He's now said this morning that he does not think he's in his village, which is about 3.5 miles southeast of the rural Deteno area of northwest Tenerife, where Jay Slater was last heard from. On that phone call with his best friend Lucy, 8:15 on that Monday when he went missing. Now, this morning, the search area has moved in the Marcas area of the national park. As we understand it, based on newspaper reports on the ground, the search and rescue teams are now moving into caves further down the ravine where they were originally searching earlier in this operation, which does suggest a new change in their procedure, although some reporters on the island are saying that the search area is eerily quiet. And having seen a convoy move away, there's not a lot of activity actually within the mountains. And it's worth stressing, actually, that this terrain is unforgiving. It's quite arid, it's mountainous, it's rocky, it's cliffy. It is extremely difficult for the mountain rescue teams to work around it, which is why so many resources have been poured into this operation. At least 4 units from the Civil Guard, the fire brigade are there, the police are there, helicopters, sniffer dogs, drones, you name it, they are on this search.
And it's 11 days. I find it hard to see how this is any more a search and rescue operation? Is this now a recovery mission?
Well, Debbie Duncan, Jay's mother, says that she still very much has hope and is calling on people at home to pray for the operation to work so that they can recover Jay. But at the same time, they've also brought in a third-party investigator who's looking away from just this northwesterly area of the island. He's looking at a wider scope of interest, what he's referring to as the criminal underworld on Tenerife, saying that something else might have happened to Jay Slater on this island. He might not have just gone missing, gotten dehydrated on that 11-hour walk from the northwest of the island to his accommodation on the south where he was partying on the Sunday night. It's suggested by this third-party private investigator that something else might have happened. Now, what's unique about this case, and contrary to many other missing persons cases that you see particularly in Britain, Spanish police aren't doing any press conferences. There's been no official line since the search and rescue operation started. Information we're getting from the island is coming from snippets of reports here and there from people speaking to the civil guard. And this is giving rise to what I'm sure you've both seen quite a lot of, which is this armchair social media sleuthing. People using TikTok and Facebook and even bizarrely Google Maps scouring across satellite images of the park to try and come up with their own theory.
It's certainly captured the imagination, hasn't it?
They're looking at Google Maps, satellite pictures that would have been taken years ago.
Sure, I've seen some very bizarre scenarios where people have said, have they tried looking here, and all the rest of it suggesting new avenues of approach and new areas, named areas of interest possibly for the search and rescue teams to get on with. Lancashire Police, it's worth noticing also, did offer their own support to this operation last week. That's come under some level of controversy. Some people saying that the Spanish police don't need Lancashire's expertise when it comes to northwest Tenerife. And the Spanish police did say that they had all the sufficient resources that they required. And the search continues.
So why aren't they doing a press conference then?
Well,
is it just not the done thing in Tenerife?
Who knows? Because there have been several missing persons cases on the island in the past. Some of them remain unsolved. But the no press conference does suggest that they're still working through several
Some remain
possible leads.
unsolved?
Yeah, this has been a long-going issue, and it's a significant popular tourist spot. You know, people do come into strange scenarios on these islands. We do know that 2 days ago, a Scottish hiker who went missing was found by the search and rescue team while they were looking for Jay Slater. It's very easy to get lost in mountainous areas, especially during difficult weather patterns. We know that on Tenerife, at the start of this search and rescue operation, it was about 26 degrees, far more forgiving than it was perhaps in Simi off the coast of Turkey when Dr. Michael Mosley went missing. That was really oppressive temperatures. But now that we're into the second week now, day 11 of this boy being missing, this 19-year-old apprentice bricklayer, the situation has changed. There's been wind and rain, some vast changes in the temperature as well. It's not a good place to be out in the open. It is not an area with particular levels of cover, and that's also affected the visibility for the helicopters and the drones, lots of low cover from the clouds, all of these factors making this a very confusing set of search and rescue operations.
Yes, the sun is very hot in Tenerife almost all year round, but then, as you say, can also be rather windy and have all sorts of weather conditions. Well, thank you, Charlie. Really appreciate you bringing us all those updates.
Well, coming up on the programme, we're going to be live in Glastonbury as the legendary festival gets underway. Don't go anywhere.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
In World War I, 309 men from Britain and the Commonwealth never came home because they'd been shot at dawn. The majority were killed for desertion, cowardice and sleeping at post. Appearing at their court-martials and told they'd brought shame on their country, these men had no opportunity to defend themselves and were executed by a firing squad. The National Memorial Arboretum launched a fundraising campaign to restore the memorial, which has stood for more than 20 years.
Thank you to your viewers for their support for the fundraising campaign. And thanks to the generosity of so many people, we've been able to replace all 309 of the posts that represent those young men that were shot in the First World War, restoration of this really precious memorial.
The centrepiece of the memorial is the young soldier, blindfolded and facing his execution. In September 1916, Private Harry Farr was ordered to the front. Already suffering from shell shock, he was overwhelmed and refused his orders. He was court-martialed, and in a trial lasting only 20 minutes, he was sentenced to death. On the day of his execution, he faced the firing squad without a blindfold. Janet Booth is Private Farr's granddaughter and was part of the public campaign to have those who were shot at dawn officially pardoned.
When I asked my gran, do you know where I could find Harry's grave? And she looked at my mother, and there was this sort of look between them, and then she said, well, he hasn't got a grave because they didn't warrant, he deserved one because he was shot as a coward and had let his country down. We can come here as a family and pay our respects to him, and also for all the other families, it's somewhere to come and remember their loved ones.
The People's Channel.
GB News is Britain's election channel.
And when the big stories break, we're tackling them on Britain's Newsroom. When we disagree, and we disagree a lot, it's even livelier than normal.
We don't disagree that much.
We do.
His comedy, though, is revolting. I knew her, unlike you. That explains Beverly Turner's temperament.
It's a bit frosty in here, isn't it?
He'll have one of me one day.
For dartball practice.
Britain's Newsroom on GB News. Weekdays, 9:30 a.m.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Congratulations to the GB News winners at this year's Trick Awards.
And the winner of Interview of the Year is... Alistair Stewart reveals his heartbreaking diagnosis to Camilla Tormini.
And the winner is GB News Breakfast. And the winner is Nigel Farage. And thank you to you, our GB News viewers and listeners, for making us the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It is 10 minutes to 3, and the music festival Glastonbury enters its second day as fans start arriving at Worthy Farm.
Oh, and they are arriving. The music is due to start tomorrow with stars like Dua Lipa,
SZA.
Well, how the hell was I supposed to know that?
'Cause they're
it's spelled
great.
SZA.
Yeah,
Anyway,
SZA.
SZA. And also Coldplay, set to perform, although I think they do every year.
Just about, yeah. But the Deputy Labour Party leader, Angela Rayner, won't be able to use her tickets this weekend. She's called it off due to the election.
Oh, no, the red tent. They'll sorely miss her.
They will.
They'll sorely miss her. Anyway, let's cross straight over to Glastonbury, where showbiz reporter Stephanie Tecci is waiting for us. Stephanie, thank you so much for taking some time out from the festivities. So how's it looking? What's the atmosphere like? What are you wearing?
It is the calm before the storm, Emily. It's day 2, so there's no music on Worthy Farm at the moment. So at the moment, you're just seeing a...
And it is the famous lack of signal in Glastonbury that we have now run headfirst into. Emily, you went a few years ago. And
2016.
You were saying that it's hard to get phone signal anywhere.
Yes, I had to. So it was the year of the Brexit vote, and that was over the Glastonbury period. And I wanted to make some phone calls when the result came in, and I had to climb to the top of the hill to try and get a bit of phone signal. Yeah, maybe a hill like that, although that looks a bit like flat ground, doesn't it? Oh, no, there's a hill.
Yeah.
So, yes, I had to climb up. But, yes, as you can imagine, the whole of Worthy Farm was bedecked with EU flags.
Bedecked with EU flags. Was that the reason you had to get on your phone? Just to talk to someone else who might have thought that this might not be the end of the world?
How did you know? How did you know how I voted, Tom?
I can have a guess.
Yes. And I remember there were lots of emotions, but people cheered themselves up quite quickly with all the music and everything else that goes with the Glastonbury, and going, oh, that's such a shame we missed Stephanie Tecci there. But these things happen. Perhaps we'll connect back with her another time.
Yes.
But yes.
But the atmosphere must have been incredible that morning, because people waking up, perhaps not particularly early in the morning, and suddenly feeling like they're in a completely different world. It must have been quite emotional.
I think it was emotional for people, yes. As you can imagine, there's lots of people who were very sad. Devastated, in fact. But Glastonbury is a place of hope and joy and lots of festivities, lots of music and everything. So you can cheer yourself up quite easily, can't you?
Famously a place of no borders. Very often you see these signs that say, You know, no borders at all. Next to the fencing that surrounds
the
Worthy
10-foot
Farm.
metal cage that you're in. Yes.
No, it's a slight bit of irony we often see on social media there.
Maybe Corbyn will be down there. Oh, no, he'll be campaigning too, won't he?
Yeah. Well, Rishi Sunak is to be interviewed tonight at 7 o'clock with Christopher Hope, our very own political editor. You will want to tune in and see this interview this evening right here on GB News. And what's even better than that, you'll get a sneak preview. Yes, up next, it's Martin Daubney from 3 o'clock, where he will be showing a little clip of what Rishi Sunak had to say to our political editor from inside a pub.
Yeah, it's very interesting, actually. Stay tuned.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi there, welcome along to the latest forecast from the Met Office for GB News. It's very warm in the southeast this afternoon, but it is turning much cooler during the next day or so across the whole of the UK as this unseasonably deep low moves into the northwest, and that's going to bring some increasingly strong winds, gusts into the 40s miles an hour across western Scotland and Northern Ireland. Could cause some ferry disruption, some bridge closures, and it's also going to make it feel unpleasant with spiralling bands of rain reaching western Scotland and Northern Ireland, showers for northern England, parts of Wales and the southwest with a lot of cloud here and much cooler, but we keep the warmth in the southeast at least for the first few hours of the afternoon. Temperatures into the high 20s once again. Before that, cooler air sweeps across the whole of the UK, and it's certainly going to feel cool with some heavy rain clearing Shetland during the afternoon and some also persistent wet weather pushing into western Scotland, Northern Ireland, the winds staying brisk, and we've got 1 or 2 showers into Wales and the southwest. A lot of